it works in business as well, right?
Yes.
The more people react to something, it's like social media, right? You do something, if you're smart about it, you use it as a tactic to actually get the traction, right?
Yes.
It's like you do something. I was telling
it's a leverage.
Exactly. I was telling the group yesterday that I was meeting as well, the young guys, the group of entrepreneurs, guys and girls. And
they're young.
I was telling,
they're young.
They're in their 20s. But the thing for them, they're like they're digital first, right? Not even native.
Yes.
They're just like, that's all they know, right?
They know, yeah.
And, we were having this conversation because we come from behind like the internet, right? And they're like born in the internet era, like very deeply in it. And so we were telling them, because something happened, right? I asked a guy something. I was like, what do you care about, right?
Yeah.
And he's telling me he cares about this. I was like, no, what do you really care about? What do you care about? He was like asking me, how do I build a personality or profile online where people can really interact and engage? And I was like, what do you care about, right? Because basically I was going to get to like, find your inner voice, right?
Yes.
Find your voice that you can kind of shape and carve out tiny pieces of, and then use that to create stories and content, right?
Yes. Because
whatever you do it honestly, and you can do it consistently, because then you don't have to fake it up. Exactly, right? So what do you care about? Ultimately, he said something along the lines of like, I care about AI and humanity. I was like, okay, fine. Let's just run with that for the sake of time, right? So basically, if I was to assess from what you've said, you care about the impact that AI will have on making humans better. Is that? And he's like, yes, absolutely. I was like, oh, fine, great. So basically, you want to leverage the power of AI as a technology because you're not happy with the way humanity is today because we're in a tough place, and you think that AI can contribute and make humans discover their best self, whatever, right? He's like, spot on, okay. And then the kid from the other side of the room said something that he didn't agree with. And then that guy reacted. And then as the two of them were like kind of having this one kind of spar, very limited, right? He said what he think, and then this guy reacted to it. And when this guy said something, this guy reacted to it, and then everyone reacted in a way as well. And I was like, this is what social media is. Right here, what you've just done is that you've created a controversial topic, you've had a reaction, and as a result, there's other reactions that are like causing like a wildfire, right? Yeah. Engagement. This is what a good social media post looks like. Now, this is in real life what typically people are begging to do. Now, how do you recreate this, right? You just do exactly that. Pick a topic that you think will be interesting, that is personal to you, but find an angle that is somewhat maybe could be, it could charge people, and not in a way to upset people, but in a way to get them talking and to participate in an engagement. And that will be, you usually need like one or two people to lead the conversation, then boom, it'll take fire, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And it was so fascinating to like see all of this interaction, because like that's actually, so when you manipulate the situation to your advantage, if you want to get a reaction out of people, then you say things that will charge people and it will trigger them.
As long as it's not affecting you negatively.
Exactly.
Right?
Or them even. It's not, you don't want to get anything bad out of it. Exactly. The intention is to like
engage and obviously
and
discourse.
have people talk. Discourse, exactly.
In discourse that is positive, that leads somewhere good, that connects people together. When it comes to business, and you and I are entrepreneurs and we're building our own ventures.
I'm trying to be, bro. You're locking the game down right now, but
hey, you have people who are funding you. I have none. So who's the entrepreneur? Who's the real entrepreneur?
Believe me, taking other people's money is not as great or glamorous.
I didn't say great or bad, but we'll talk about this in a minute. But when it comes to how do you kind of use feedback, especially when it comes to things that you love.
Yeah.
Going back to how you don't affect or engage in feedback with your child to make sure that behavior does not kind of carve in stone and goes away. Similarly with business, when you start, everybody will be having their own opinion.
Yeah. I'm just going to make sure it's muted, by the way.
Of course. Yeah.
It's going to be loud.
So you know how everybody has an opinion. It's exactly like parenting. Everybody. I mean, you have no idea. People who have nothing to do with anything related to an entrepreneur. And I genuinely don't try. I'm trying to be an entrepreneur, but I'm not yet, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to be. When I create something, then I can call myself an entrepreneur. And yet, people who have nothing to do with anything related to entrepreneurship, they come and tell you, oh, this works, this doesn't work, oh, this is bad, this is good, and it's all about value judgment rather than actual advice. And to me, that's negative forces that is driving me down, especially the ones that I feel like, no, but that's not what I want. That's not what I mean. Why are you driving me or pulling me into that direction?
Into your limited thought process.
Exactly. Limited thought process, your world, your own aspiration. You're trying to kind of project things on me because of whatever, limitations or not that you have. Yeah. And the more I actually disregard that, whether it's not reinforcing it by not even entertaining it, positively or negatively, the more I feel like I have the thickest skin in the world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
completely.
it's like the moment before I used to get so emotional about defending my own thought process, defending my own aspiration, defending my own purpose that I'm building for myself and what I want to achieve. But then it just dragged me down. You know what I mean? Like it's energy that I'm spending. But the more I'm not ignoring, if that makes sense. I'm entertaining out of human connections perspective. But
and you're being respectful. But
that's it. That's it. And the more I internalize that, the more I become clear about what I want. And those things absolutely. Now I'm at a point where I can judge myself internally, like introspectively.
Yeah.
It doesn't even affect me a bit. I'm so clear because of that. Like I'm not even entertaining that thought process or that feedback and weaning it out. So that tantrum is sort of going away on its own. You know what I mean?
I love how you brought that back.
Do you see that? Does that happen to you as well? I mean,
it does.
How did people receive your startup as a baby that you're growing? And everyone has their own sort of, oh, this is the new baby. Don't, you know, first 6 months, make sure they don't die.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's very true for startups. I think the thing that I never really understood, but I began to understand later, the first time I started to become critical of opinions and ideas from other people, properly, as far as it being an entrepreneur, I prefer to call myself a builder. I mean, I use the word entrepreneur, but I prefer to call myself a builder now because I feel like I am literally building something.
Sure.
And it's not just software, right? Because I'm not the one building the actual technology, right?
It's the
I'm not
system,
the engineer.
right?
Yeah,
It's the process.
I'm creating the environment, the ecosystem that enables my co-founder and my team to be able to actually do the building, right?
True.
But I'm building the pathway. I'm building the opportunities. I'm building the vision, whatever, right?
The market, exactly.
Right? We have a good brand. People recognize us. Somebody the other day called me a very frothy startup, and he's like, "What the, beep do you actually do?" And it was a great conversation too. But and it's good feedback because it gives me a sense that okay, fine, people recognize the brand, but they don't know what it is behind the brand, right? And
they shouldn't.
They don't need to, right? It's like top of mind, right? You fill the funnel like that.
Yes.
But I think the first time I realized this was when a person working at, I think it was like Schneider or some other like corporate entity where they were a partner of a kind of a venture builder or I think it was like an accelerator.
Gotcha.
Many years ago.
Gotcha. And
this person who's like a manager in some department of this company. Okay. I can't remember what it was. I think it was Schneider, but anyway. And they're giving advice on like a question to them by the founder. I was also there as a mentor, as like kind of speed dating.
Gotcha.
Sort of thing,
Okay.
Right? But I'm just building a service company at this point, my digital agency with my wife. And so like you, I also have run a company for many years with my partner. Anyway, so, and this person sitting there and with like so much confidence is telling them how they should basically budget and manage their life to be able to survive as a startup founder. The question was basically, how do I manage my life and my expenses as, to build a startup? And this guy was like, he completely neglected the fact that the fundamental difference between the two of you is that one of you is guaranteed a paycheck at the end of the month. The other one has to fight tooth and nail to get a tenth of that as a paycheck, maybe every few months, because they're not going to get funding for a few months or years. They got to like build something before someone will buy it. So the money's not going to come.
Maybe a client payment is just delayed for whatever reason. Yeah,
exactly. Right. So there's so many different reasons.
Entrepreneur issues.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just sitting, I didn't comment on it at the time, but I just thought about it. I told my friend who runs the program and I was like, man, this is like, you gotta really cherry pick the people that you bring in here because that was rubbish. That was actually really terrible feedback because it's like, you've neglected the fact that person, I mean, I don't know if they had a family or a kid or any kids or anything, but I just thought for a second, that is really bad advice. Like that's what bad advice looks like. It's like you have no context. You've taken something that you don't understand at all, even at a basic level. And then you've brought your very limited, very myopic idea to a table where an entire world outside of that exists, which you're unaware of.
Absolutely.
And then you've zoomed into this one thing which you have no experience with.
That's arrogance.
And that's exactly, and it's egregious. It's horrible. Like how do you, And what if that person was impressionable enough that they actually took some of that advice?
And why wouldn't they? They don't know any better, right?
Exactly, right? Exactly. They're
like
the ones asking the question.
Senior person sitting in front of me. And, I love corporate people who are extremely humble. And by the way, I mean, my experience, and that's my own anecdote, right? 9 out of 10 corporate people are more humble than entrepreneurs. I don't know why. Maybe it's my own circles, but like, even if you look at this podcast, right? Escapade, you'll find that all of them are almost corporate people, from IBM, from Accenture, from others, right? And all leadership CEOs.
That's why I'm like, what, you've got all these A-list people, by the way. Like, what am I doing here? Like, how did you even find me? We'll talk about that separately.
Well, I'll build into that humility in a second, right?
It's not humility. I'm being very honest.
But what I'm trying to say here is, it's not by design. It's by accident, because all of the real entrepreneurs like you, who I reached out to, almost didn't respond. Either they ghosted, or they said, you know what, no, your platform is too small for me to kind of come to.
Oh, really?
It happened. And a couple of them asked for money. Imagine that. I mean, obviously, everybody to their own devices.
Sure.
I judge, fine. You want to judge, you don't want to judge, it's fine. Everybody to their own device. But the point that I'm trying to make is, comes back to that. However, when it comes to advice giving, I think it's not arrogance or egocentricity. It's more of, you really don't know what it's like to be a true venture builder. You know what I mean? Like, you think because you built a multi-million dollar, like $200 million business within your corporate with your unlimited resources and brand power and all of that, you think that...
And 50 people in finance.
And 50 people in finance and 100 people in HR to get you the best of the best in zero time. Like, you have that. You think that it's the same here, and therefore it gives you, with all the sincere sort of intentions in the world, to give advice. And that's, to me, is someone sitting on a high tower with all the good intentions, right? Asking people, why don't they eat biscuits? If they don't have bread, if that makes sense.
Marie Antoinette, basically.
Exactly. So that, and that, with all the good intentions in the world, again. So there is this sort of elitism when it comes to the entrepreneurs who made it. That is, in my opinion, again, this is my own opinion, vicious. But then with corporates, they have the good intentions, but they don't know any better. You know what I mean? Like,
I do, yeah. I mean, I would probably, like, I completely understand and agree with what you're saying. I would, the way I see...
That's a broad brush that I'm not brushing everyone, right?
Completely.
It's always...
Absolutely. You've got a few apples that are green and many of them are red, whatever, right? But I would say that it's probably more ignorance, in my opinion, because... we started with this. You don't know what you don't know, right? And I think for those of you who don't know the reference, Donald Rumsfeld, who famously said, "You don't know what you don't know," when the Gulf War was confusing everybody. And I think that problem of, it's not even experience, because people can be very experienced, but they stay on the same track for a long time.
True.
It's when you get off the track.
Yes.
And then suddenly you got to I say this a lot these days, people are like, how much runway do you have? I'm like,
oh yes,
I don't know, how much air do I have left to breathe, right? Like, I'll keep finding I'm a cockroach. I'm going to find a way to live and survive as a company, as a founder. I don't want to let this die, because I want to find oxygen from somewhere. And it finds us sometimes, right?
And that's a skill, right? It
is an art. I have to admit, like, now having like been through like these ups and downs. But I think, I'm kind of forgetting what I was going to say.
We're talking about the corporates versus the
but like, I was going to make a very specific point, because anyway, shit, I think I've just lost it. Oh no.
The energy is so
what was the
high.
last thing? I know it was very high. What was the last thing you said? Like right before we...
The vicious intentions and the kind
so
of
the ignorance, right?
and the
exactly,
ignorance.
So like, exactly. So I say this a lot. Like, I'm like, people are like, how much runway do you have? And I'll be like, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months. And then, suddenly you'll see this cringe. And I'm like, what did you want to hear? Like 12 months? And if I had 12 months of cash in the bank, why would I be talking to you about raising money right now? Unless I'm raising $10 million because I'm in a growth round and I'm already hit profitability 6-9 months ago. And I've got,
That's a different stage altogether.
Yeah, exactly. I'm early stage. I'm, give me a break, right? I mean, I'm experienced. I've built a couple of companies. Like, at some point, you're just going to have to say, okay, I'm going to take a punt, because it seems like a really interesting person and they're building a really big problem, solving for a really big problem. And it seems like they're the ones who are going to get it done, right? Whatever. You trust the process, right? And many people have. We have amazing investors who've come and, backed us.
And you do the proper due diligence. We'll talk
exactly.
about this.
Exactly. But and I say this thing a lot, which I've now said 3 times and I haven't even said the thing, is that when you run out of gas, you can still walk to the destination.
True.
You know, I mean, God forbid, if you aren't able to walk, you can wheelchair it, whatever, right? Like the destination doesn't stop or move because you've decided you cannot get to it, right? You change your mode of transportation, but it'll take you a bit longer to get there. But if your vision changes or if your motivation or your conviction changes, it just means that you weren't like convinced in the first place, right? You were just looking for like something that was convenient or easy.
Zohare, that's powerful.
I mean, it's just like, it doesn't make sense to me otherwise.
I think if investors look at that mindset in the founders, that's the due diligence that they need to do more than anything else. If the founder has that mindset of, I don't care if the gas stops or runs out, I still can walk. If I can't walk, I can wheelchair. If I can't wheelchair, I'll crawl. Whatever it is.
Whatever I need to do.
I know, like my conviction
is so high. Yeah.
Is so high that the destination never moves.
Yeah.
It's me who either wants to go to it at this time or this way or that way. Yeah. And as cliche as it is, when there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. And it's incumbent on the how do I say it, on the investor to have enough competency to spot this type of mindset and philosophy.
The doggedness, you know?
Exactly. In the founders, and therefore use it as a metric and a measure to see if they're willing to partner with them through investing or not. That's powerful. I like that.
My father always told me growing up, and I'm sure like every sensible parent has always told their
1%. I'm happy.
Yeah, like my dad always said to me, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And I feel like the problem of where we are today as builders, as founders, is we're programmed, right? As founders, okay, I have an idea. I have to find a good reason for why that idea will turn into a big business. And then I have to demonstrate that there's an opportunity there. And then I have to convince a bunch of people to pour some money in so I can actually do something with it, right? But the formula has been confused somewhere because of all this. And I'm so against it. I have never once like made a PR or media announcement about our fundraise. Like, yes, we recently had some, STC is one of our investors and they recently announced it. That investment happened, a few months ago. But yeah, of course, I'm going to talk about that. We have our investors who celebrate, having invested in us, but I don't ever go on press and say, Jalebi's raised X million dollars, whatever, right? And because I just don't think that that's a good news bite for me. I feel like that's actually sending the wrong message. First, I didn't like it because raising money from investors is not the news. The news is why they invested in your company and what you've done as a result to get them to invest. That's the headline, right? They achieve like a KPI of, I don't know, they processed 10 million orders, right? And as a result, they got X investors. That's the thing, right? It's like, what was the trigger and then led to the due diligence?
That's more value I can use as a
It is, right? And as a founder, that's the news I want to see. But the thing is, that's not what gets the clicks because the media, fuels this headline of like XYZ raises this much money and 90% of it is a debt round. That means they haven't really raised that money. They're going to use it to fuel the business, which means that, it's liquidity or cash flow. Anyway, all these mixed matches. And the problem is that the investor community has, I feel, a responsibility to steer the narrative because, it's important for founders to understand we're not building a company because we want to get invested in. We're building a company because we're trying to create value and solve a problem. Yeah. And that's what everybody wants to say. And behind closed doors.
Who doesn't understand that? Is it the founders or the investors?
I think that more. It's not, it's both and neither. I'll tell you why. Yeah. I think, so I'm a comms and a media guy, right? In the band, like I can build brands from scratch. That's what I've basically done. And so my career started with project management. I evolved into like the digital space and brand and communications and, built a few companies. But I think for me, when I look at like kind of in between the lines and I see that there's the thing that the investor is saying and doing, and then there's the thing that the founder is saying and doing, and then there's the thing that they're saying and doing together. Yeah. And then there's the stuff that they're not actually saying, but they're doing. Okay. Right. And what that means is like, the investor wants you to have, 50K, 100K MRR every month. Okay. And they're an early stage investor and they back the founder, right? Yeah. There's a huge disconnect in that big statement, right? $50,000 of MRR basically means I'm making $600,000 of revenue a year, right? I've even heard as far as like,
That's pre-seed, you mean?
Yeah, between pre-seed and seed, right? Okay. And I've even heard people saying we want to see $100,000 of MRR, which is $1,200,000 of revenue a year, right? And an early stage investor, we're talking about like someone investing anywhere between, let's say, $150,000 to $500,000, right? If I'm raising, let's say on average, $300,000 from an investor, and I'm making $1.5 million a year in revenue, right? If I'm doing a round of investment and I'm really trying to figure out like, what am I trying to convince you of at that level? And $100,000 revenue is pretty good money, right? I mean, at that level, probably running break even, probably even profitable, right?
Yeah.
And so the confusion is that the headline says I've just diluted. Basically, if you really read into it, I've raised X amount of money, basically reads as I've just given away this much of my company to someone in exchange for this money, right? And now I have to prove that
means I'm desperate, probably.
Maybe no. I don't think it means you're desperate. But I think what it does is it sets a wrong KPI of success for founders. It's like, I got to go and raise that money.
That's
too.
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, if you're able, I mean, there's nothing. I mean, we've talked about this with multiple other either investors or founders, and I'm no expert in this. I'm still learning as I go. But there is this perception of, I'm working to get funding.
Exactly. That's the problem.
And I'm like, but that's desperate thinking. Because if you're scrambling for investing, that means you don't have the resources. You're not able to self-finance, to bootstrap. You don't have the skill set. You don't have, because you're outsourcing everything to someone else to do it, and you're not doing it yourself. That means your skill set is not as valuable or sellable as whatever. I mean, these are perceptions that. So
I don't agree with that, and I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you why I don't agree with it. But I think it's important to unpack this.
Okay.
What you've just basically said, you've described a business mindset. What you have is a business mindset. You're like, I have a skill or I have a product and I'm going to sell it and I'm going to make money from it. And that money will then help me grow the business.
Not sell it particularly, but I mean, use my own resources, like the ability to use whatever I have.
You work with what you have and do what you can with it, right?
Because that resourcefulness.
Exactly. That I fundamentally agree with. And this is what I'm shifting myself to as a founder, is like, really think about your customer revenue should be the thing that's financing your business, basically, right?
100%. Yeah.
And this is exactly. And so this is really important, because what you've just described. Now, imagine that the conversation we're having right now is where the thing that we just talked about earlier was people standing on the edge of one cliff.
Okay.
And you're standing at the edge of the other cliff.
Yeah.
And there's a tightrope in the middle.
True.
Okay.
True.
Now, the problem with this is that there's like an infinite drop in the middle. Okay. Now imagine that the tightrope has also got razor wire on it. And now founders have to walk across this thing without hurting themselves, without falling, and keeping their eye on the target, but also being able to do this with like grace. Okay. This is the journey of a founder trying to build a company that is trying to make money and trying to do it with as much grace and elegance as they can, without hurting themselves, without falling, and trying to show people that they're actually the ones skilled to do it, right?
Yeah.
The challenge here is that you've got a lot of people who are basically giving, and this is like advice, this is investors, there's all kinds of things that are coming. Some of them will enable you, some of them will inhibit you, some is headwind, some is tailwind. The art of being able to make it across to, that other side, because that is the destination truly for me as a founder, is how do you get to a point where you're not depending on external resources other than what you have available to you, right? So the difference between, let's say, a service company and a product company, to kind of unpack this a little bit more, is a service, like I built a service company. We were profitable in 18 months, never took a dime of external capital, invested our own money, made it back, became profitable. So we broke even very quickly, but then we were profitable, running profitably literally in like, I think 17 or 18 months. And then the company ran successfully. Service company, so it was just me selling my skill set, right?
True.
I was basically getting clients, whatever.
And the process and the system
exactly.
behind it. Yeah.
Now I'm building a product company. It's a whole different ballgame, because I gotta build something. I gotta build something that people will actually subscribe to or buy. And it can take anywhere between like a day and a couple of years, depending on what you're using, what the tools are available. Today, you can build stuff with AI that's faster.
True.
But
with
then it
cloud
also,
and with all of this automation system.
You've got all the infrastructure and all the tools available to you. But then the thing is that in my journey, I think that I spent a lot of time trying to understand the problem better. And so as we built the product to solve the problem, we also understood the problem better. So the product kind of evolved as the problem matured in our minds. And so the product also matured commensurate to that, right? Because we follow a very different path, right? We don't use available platforms and tools. We built every line of code.
Like we started talking about, exactly.
Absolutely. From the ground up, from scratch, following first principles methodology, which is like, go to the very root of the problem.
Yeah.
My co-founder says, ask 5 whys. and get to the bottom of the bottom of the bottom. And then when you figure it out, because the thing is that what you talk about with the customer is not the problem. That's a symptom of the problem. And you got to keep going below.
You need to understand the root cause. Yeah.
Really go to the root cause. And, the root cause is usually just a tiny, very simple thing hiding in plain sight, but nobody's aware of it because it's too simple to be the problem.
Nobody questioned the assumptions.
It's like a pebble in your shoe, right?
True.
You think that, my foot's hurting, but no, it's actually, there's a tiny little thing just needs to be removed.
I like that. Yeah.
And you realize that, people don't spend the time, and it really kind of goes back to the beginning of this conversation where if you don't understand the depth of something, the substance lacks, then it's going to be hard to really build on top because you're basically stacking a house of cards together.
100%.
For me, that's the food industry. As we've gone through this process of like trying to unlearn it, really taking a very product mindset to like understand the problem of the industry, realize that nobody really took the time to build a good foundation from a tech infrastructure point of view, right? And here comes this, silly little startup trying to do that. And I think what happens is that, we lose track of why we're doing what we're doing because we think about fight or flight, survival. Okay, I've done as much as I need to. Now I can get someone to invest in it. Investing is like credit in a way that, if you're smart, you can use credit as a very good tool to be able to get you to the next thing, right? I had a bad relationship with credit when I was a college kid. As I'm older, I've become much smarter about it. Credit is a very dangerous thing if you don't know how to use it. Of
course.
A lot of people treat it like extra money, but no,
it's
if you
a
have
debt.
40,000, exactly. And I don't think the meaning of debt really I'm like, look, it's like think about water displacement, right? Like if you put a rock in a bathtub, it's going to displace water. Now, let's say the rock doesn't belong to you. That rock you have to return to somebody else. You have to fill that thing with the equal amount of water that it has displaced. But it also means that whatever water is left is equal to the space that the rock took. That means that the water that you have is equal to the rock. Ergo, what you have isn't yours anymore.
True.
Because what it's displaced, it's reduced,
it's gone.
but it's also, so technically you're that much less. Like if it's 40,000 cash you have and 40,000 debt you take, you're basically in net negative 40,000 because now the money that you have is going to go there because when you spend it, why don't you just not take that?
That's my philosophy. Most people think about building the perfect idea, the perfect pitch deck, obviously, the perfect presentation for investors, and they literally waste time. And I think this is what I want to say. They waste lots of energy and time into trying to find that perfect elevator pitch for these investors, whilst if they just spend the same time and effort into building and bootstrapping and self-financing and just focusing on the client, focusing on the problem, focusing on the product, making sure that the product don't suck, because there's a reason why they're not able to get it off the ground. Maybe it sucks. Maybe they have to look intrinsically and just introspectively and see it's not about not having money. It's about why don't these first 10 clients rejected you? There's a reason for that. And and the problem is your mind has this weird thing of focus, right? You see thing and then everything else becomes blur or doesn't exist. Once you kind of zoom out and see, okay, no, it's not about financing. It's not about at least at a certain stage, right? Like you said, if it's a ride hailing or if it's a food tech,
product, like something that needs to be built.
Then obviously there's something that, but at least there's this level of self-financing and bootstrapping that you have to do. For example, building a website. You don't need to hire building websites. You can do it yourself.
Squarespace.
I mean, come on, Squarespace, do it yourself. I mean, I get crazy when people come to me and say, we need marketing. And I'm like, what did you do? I was like, nothing. I was like, so you're outsourcing your most critical and fundamental part of your own business to acquire clients instead of doing it yourself. I mean, acquiring clients is the most important fundamental thing in any business, especially if you're a startup. And you're actually outsourcing that? So how, I mean, what if that
How are you going to qualify it? How are you going to know it's good or bad?
And how are you going to get the feedback out of those sort of whatever negative or positive? So the point that I'm trying to make is if you're able to learn those skills and master them, and to me, that's what a true entrepreneurship is.
That's
because
true.
the moment you know these things, it doesn't matter if you're building a service company, if you're building a biotech, health tech, ed tech, fintech, food tech, whatever it is that you're building, you'll be able to replicate it because it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Your ability to go to where your clients are, speak their language, understand their problems, and then fulfill that problem in a way that they're happy to change hand with you. because of the value that you created, that is the learning. Now, if you're outsourcing that from the beginning and your pitch deck looks like, you know what, I need this money to hire these people who will do this thing.
Yeah.
To me, I think this is what I'm trying to say. It's just learn how to do things yourself.
Yeah.
And I don't see that often, especially in new startups here. I don't know what's your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's amazing actually what you just said, because I mean, 25-year-old me is very offended by what you just said. Like I'm like, if I was 25 years old and you said this to me, I'd be livid right now. I'm like, who do you think you are, you boomer? But the thing is that you're spot on, because I think that we don't depend on ourselves for the things that we can do, and we think that we need to have help for. So there's certain things that we are not good at, and maybe we don't have the time to be good at it. Maybe it's not as much of a priority. So, for example, I don't write software code, right? My co-founder does not either. So we have people on the team, but I've learned a little bit of coding when I was in college, when I was younger, and I'm familiar with bits and bobs of what it looks like. So I understand a little behind the scenes, and I also understand outside, and I understand the process really well. So for me to be able to qualify it to a certain degree is sufficient at my level. But then, my co-founder has better knowledge about that because he is an engineer, not a software engineer, but he understands the fundamentals of engineering at a basic level. And so he's able to qualify it slightly deeper because he understands the complexity around it. And then we trust people at some level, right?
Yeah.
But I think, what lacks, and I mean now, and these people I saw the other day, yesterday, they remind me, because they're all building stuff themselves, right? And they have the tools to do it, and they're much more independent. I think it's more people like maybe in their 30s and 40s who will kind of follow this formula that you're talking about as well. And the reason why I said that 25-year-old me would be offended, because quite literally what you just described is exactly what we were doing when we started building this company, Jalebi.
Yeah.
Like our first 6 to 9 months we didn't build any actual product. We just did pitch decks. We're just, but it was, I'll be honest, like You're
testing the market?
I was trying to just test feedback. I was trying to get like a sense of like, where can we find stickiness? Like who responds to this?
Yeah.
And our initial target market was basically investors, accelerators, and there were no customers at the time. We did lots of market research, desktop research. We couldn't go anywhere, so couldn't really talk to anyone. We did a lot of interviews and things with people remotely and stuff, through personal connections, just to try. Our first 2 years was just trying to, and so in
hindsight, would you do it again the same way, or would you do it differently?
I would do the thing I would do different, and this is what I wanted to get at actually, was that I would not discount our process was actually customer discovery led. It was all about finding out the problem. And so our first business model was very different from what we actually do today, but it's logically on the same track. It's like, okay, let's say that there's a railway station and you've got 5 stops in the station, and there's one station that's very popular. Everyone shows up there because probably the confectionery stand there is like got the best stuff, right? Everyone goes there. And so, that's where everyone crowds first. And so you're like, okay, fine, herd mentality, let's start there and we'll kind of figure out. And then, as you start to kind of see the patterns, I'm a very big pattern, like I have a bit of OCD about shapes and things. And, I look at things for a while and I'll really kind of space out. When someone's talking to me, my way of concentrating is looking away. I get distracted when I look at people directly, when they're trying to make me think about something, right? Not like having a conversation, but when and I look away because I look into space because I'm like visualizing that. Right. And after a while, I'll see the pattern. Okay, fine. There's a problem with the herding because people are coming here without really understanding why they're here. And then, you see some problems with the distribution model, whatever. And then you're like, okay, let's go to the next station and the next station. And then suddenly you end up and you're like at the one station that nobody wants to be at.
Right.
Why? Maybe there's a foul stench coming from the toilet. Maybe the track isn't so nice. Maybe, I don't know, whatever, right? Like it's something that's just not charming about it, right? And so less people are there because people want shiny objects, right? That's just, we're like flies to light. I was going to say something else, but yeah, exactly. Moths to a flame. Wow, that's also morbid. Anyway. And so our process was, okay, so our whole approach was we want to be in the food space. We want to build a B2B product because I've had my fingers burnt by B2C. So is my co-founder. And it's got to be a product, not a service, because we don't want to be a service company, because then there's like unlimited amounts of like edits and modifications.
So you're not a SaaS?
We are a SaaS, but so when we say we're software as a service, that still means that there's a product that people are subscribing to.
Understood.
The service is the product giving a service, but we are not the service provider.
Gotcha.
The product is the service provider. We build the product once. That's where scale comes from, right?
Yes.
So.
Yes. It's not time that you're selling.
We're not selling, exactly. We're not selling our skill as experts in the thing. Yeah. Our skill goes into the product, and the product then disperses that. That's how you can serve millions of customers.
True.
So, and so we started off on one side. We're like, okay, this is what the value chain looks like, okay, from one end to the other end. But we started on this end, the popular station.
Right.
Okay, this is the demand side, as we'll call it. This is where all your payment services are. This is where like your delivery aggregators are, because it's like the bridge between the business and the consumer, because you're like, that's where the money's happening. That's where the volume of activity is happening, right?
Okay.
And that's the shiny thing. That's everybody's going to. And then we're like, but it's crowded, right? And okay, fine, maybe it's crowded, but you could still come out as a knight in shining armor. But what is the problem that you can solve that other people haven't tried? And do you know everything about everything? You don't. You cannot, right? Unless you've read every book, in which case you're probably more theoretical than you are practical. And so we kind of use that as a logical process and we didn't realize it at the time because we thought we had a model. We knew what we wanted to build. We just had to figure out, okay, if we want to build the whole train station and the train tracks and the train that sits on the tracks. Okay, let's say we want to build, I used to use this example in the early days. It's like, I want to build the engine and the first 5 cars, the cabooses, right?
Yes.
And then I want to basically have a latch at the end where people can add their own cabooses and then eventually become the rails that other people can build on top of, right? Like an open API approach, right?
A platform, some sort.
Exactly. Like, so you build the initial rails and then other people will come and stack up on top of that. So then you can become like a marketplace, kind of like Android is, right? And so we're like, okay, but we have to get the rails, the infrastructure right first. So we're like, okay, fine, let's build there. And then as we sort of we quickly failed business models. Like within 2 or 3 months, we would eliminate.
How do you know that you failed?
We knew it because, so we understood certain things. I mean, I think this is where some kind of like looking between the lines and reasoning came in. It's like, okay, there were 2 other companies that were doing the same thing that we wanted to start doing. And we found out about that after we kind of initially built our pitch deck. As in our market research, we found them. One had just emerged from stealth in the region, and one had been doing it for a few years before COVID in Europe. And the one in Europe had quite a bit of traction. They'd already generated like 10 million orders. They had raised a few $1 million of funding, but they're in Europe, so it's fine. It's a different market. The one in the region, different ball game, they've just started. The thing that was common between the 2 of them, one of them was like well-resourced and said they'd got a lot of traction, credibility. One of them had just come out with like a few $1 million in the bank. Okay. And they were going to do a POC with a big local company. So now I got to go back and say, okay, I've got $3,000 in my bank account between me and my co-founder. We don't have a product. We definitely don't have like, any kind of a client or a customer who's willing to pilot with us. So the time it'll take for us to get to even the level that they're at, they'll be leagues ahead of us, right? So it's not even
pragmatic in your analysis.
We were pragmatic. It was like, we're not even going to be able, it's not a competition when the other, it's not an unfair advantage. They're just starting line is further.
It's just reality.
It's just reality, right? It's like,
okay, so that was your
and
sort
that was
of
our
measure.
logic, and that we just used that process to quickly eliminate different business. We did the pay at table model December, January 2020, 2021. Right? We did that for like a couple of months. It was a catastrophic failure. I wouldn't say a failure, but it's just like something we tried and it didn't stick. Restaurants didn't care about digital experiences. Even now you go and you'll scan a QR, you get a PDF. Like, come on, what's up with that?
True.
But the thing is that the business doesn't care so much about customer experience in that level. They care about the actual experience, because the thing is there's a lot of ego in the industry, right? And we'll get to that a little bit later. I want to kind of talk about the company, the business and everything separately.
Yes.
But just to kind of talk about the process of thinking and how it kind of ties back to fundraising and the logic of like why you would go and raise money is like, what is the goal? Is the goal to raise money so that you can actually build the product, or is the goal to solve a problem and as a result get money to help you solve the problem?
Yes.
Right? It's like the way of looking at it, right?
Yes.
And that's
where
it
goes.
goes.
It's a paradigm, the way, the lens that you see. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And so we use this as a process to kind of quickly eliminate business models, because we were trying to see, okay, do we get good response from some market? Do we get some response from investors? Like, did the combination of the 2 culminate into, okay, this looks like something we should chase, right?
How much of that was rational versus gut feeling in your view?
Everything was initially a sense of a combination of both, but it was probably more rational than it was gut. But so what we do today as a company was based on a U-turn that we made to go back to an earlier thing that we had sort of interacted with a few months prior, that only one person actually vocalized, but everyone else never said that. But the moment we made that the centerpiece of our product, everyone started to gravitate around that. The whole industry, nobody talked about what we were going to do forever. It was just not done, right?
The food waste, you mean? And
no, inventory as the core part of the business.
Management,
right? Inventory management is a core of the business, right?
True.
Everyone talks about inventory as a part of the business, right? It's like I've got 5 toes on my finger, on my foot, and so I've got the pinky, the big toe, and everyone else in the middle. And so the big toe was the boss, and the pinky was kind of like the inventory, right? It was like, no, it's the other way around, actually, guys. That thing.
For food, I mean, you'd think. I mean, I'm not an expert, obviously, but you'd think that those kind of giants in the industry,
that's what everybody thought,
because it's perishable. Like you can't have over, you can't have under. Like it has to be dialed in exactly to your operations and to your customer base, and it wasn't.
So if I was to use the example of the way you made coffee right now,
right?
That's not how 99% of people make coffee.
True.
People take a jar, they take a spoon, they pull out these kernels, they put it in a mug, they fill up hot water, they stir it, and that's coffee.
True.
Okay. You will have an opinion about that, I'm sure. I know many people who will
very strong.
And it's not a question of like, I value my time. For a lot of people, that's good enough, right? And that's fine, right? To each their own, as you said, right?
True.
We will cringe in our private space.
Exactly. It's like, right? No value judgment.
I would love people to make that for me. I don't have the bandwidth to do it. So I try and find the middle ground where I'll try and find a good capsule and I'll put it in like a dulce gusto because I'm also cheap at the end of the day. And it still takes a few minutes to make. So it's slower than
best
stirring.
of both worlds. Yeah,
exactly. I'm like, okay, that's, and I don't want to, I'll do it in my private home so nobody judges me. But I think, it's like time and value. Anyway, so I think this process for us, and, just to kind of answer your question, that care and level of attention is something that gets missed out because the people who are doing that are people who are not very reliant on technology. Let's put it that way, right? And technology, if you think about it, right? A lot of technology has become this thing where, so
when you say doing that, what do you exactly mean by that?
You made me, so let's unpack this process for a second, okay? You gave me choice, where you gave me a choice between 2 beans. Okay. You made me smell them. I got the aroma. Okay. Now I'm not a connoisseur, but I have a sense of taste for myself. And I had a preference. You gave me the choice. And then from that choice, then you took the beans and then you ground the beans. Okay. And then after grinding the beans, then you put them in the thingy that goes into the
portafilter.
Yeah, exactly. And then you used a little metal brush thing to space them out so that, they don't clump, which I understood. And then, you put it in the machine and then you poured the coffee and then you used a certain water to make it into an Americano. And, that's what a barista would do. Like people would pay 20 to 28 dirhams to 50 dirhams even, depending on where you buy it from, like for that kind of experience, right? You just gave it to me for being here. Like you actually rewarded me with that experience.
Oh, thank you.
I should be paying you for this, right? How dare people ask to be paid to be on this podcast? They are being paid by being here. And so
I was like, I'll take it as a compliment. Thank you.
No, but it's true though. And, so you put that effort in. Now, the thing is that we don't have that kind of time as people, right? We're just we need to get things done quickly or whatever. And you took the time, you took the care. Now, what basically, I was going to kind of go back to something separately. Like I noticed you have a Samsung screen here.
Yeah.
Most people don't know this, but most LED screens rely on Samsung for their chip and the basically the technology that makes it into thing. It's like a laptop, right? Like most of the hardware is made by 10 other companies. The brand on it is just the brand, right? Except for Apple is slightly different because they have some proprietary tech in there. But the thing is that the lack of this technology is because the people who built the tech, and this is really important to understand because it really goes back to the essence of how this whole recording session started.
Yeah.
And really kind of goes to the core of like my being as a person is like the things that really kind of make me ask questions, right? Is the people who built the products that serve the industry aren't the people who are using the products, right? And now the rule of business, in my opinion, is you're not your own customer, so don't build for yourself.
Sure.
Build for someone who you can validate is actually a user because they're willing to pay you, but then you got to find many others who will repeat that process.
Yeah.
Now, people who are building technology to solve a problem, and again, we'll go back to the point about where herds gravitate to where the shiny objects are, which is on one side of the value chain, and another side is entirely neglected because everyone thinks, well, everyone's there, so we all need to be there. It's like the stock market.
Yeah.
The reason why
it's a social proofing sort of.
It's social proofing, but I think we get lost in the social proofing and we lack the ability to go back and like really quantify and qualify, like how did it get there in the first place? Like, do I know enough about why they're there as opposed to like, they're just there, so I take it for granted.
Which is a different skill, which is the critical thinking, right?
It is critical thinking, exactly. And so to answer your question, yes, it does exist. It exists in many shapes and forms, and some of them are very good as well, okay? But I'll ask you a very simple question, okay? Will you buy a car without tires?
No, of course.
Okay. Do you buy a car because of the tires?
No.
Okay. Will you tell the company that you're buying the car from to have certain tires on it, otherwise you won't buy the car? Okay. Well, that's the food industry. They buy the tires, or they buy the tires. What they actually want is the whole car, okay? But the problem here is that the tires become the car somehow because they're seen as more important because they're the things that actually allow the mobility to happen. That's the point of sale. Now, the point of sale, in my opinion, is an overglorified part of the process, which has become the centerpiece of the process. Because if you go back in time to when technology was first introduced into the F&B industry, it was an accident.
Introducing the POC to the
POS, it was so. I mean, we did a lot of research on this, and I need to kind of fact check again on this. So, please take it with a pinch of salt. But what I remember quite vividly when I was going through the process of like, how did the POS come to be? How did it become what it is? Because, for me to understand how I'm going to challenge an industry, and it wasn't the POS that we were after. Right. We just knew that that's the centerpiece of the business. And like, even with this amazing part of the businesses are still struggling to make profit. Like, why is that the case?
And that's the problem that you were tackling.
The problem we were trying to tackle was basically business. So the problem we were trying to tackle originally was like, why do restaurants fail so much? Roughly 50 to 60% of restaurants fail every year. Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
And, it's very close to entrepreneurship because the stats are exactly the same. And I found a very fascinating parallel, which I'll share with you. So, our thesis was originally COVID, dine-in is dead. People have to get food. They're going to get bored of and probably not going to be able to cook at home. So delivery is going to skyrocket. So we saw that, right?
Which happened, yeah.
And it happened. And it went from literally delivery contributed to 17% of the revenue share before COVID. It flipped. It became like 73% or something, literally overnight, right?
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Because literally the number of delivery drivers at the restaurants is probably more than the customers themselves.
And the customers, exactly. Yes, absolutely. And the delivery drivers have efficiency. They have to serve certain number of deliveries, and many of them are performance-based. So we're like, okay, let's build a tool that will aggregate all the delivery companies into one API and then plug that into a point of sale, and that would become our product, right? Then there were some companies that came out, and like I mentioned already, so I'm not going to go into that. But what I want to talk about is like why. So the reason why we kind of came to this thing was very accidental. It was like 18 months after we started the process that we actually came to this. We didn't understand that this was the problem. We were using a process of elimination.
That's the best way to come to a problem, isn't it?
I think so too. So, and you can't.
It's not like you read a book about swimming and then you went and you actually went. You probably drowned a couple of times. You drank water and then
exactly. And
now
we know exactly. And I think we came to a point where
that's invaluable.
It's highly, and the knowledge that we acquired in the process was incredible because I have a co-founder who's a product guy, right? So he thinks about things from a very methodical point of view. He's system-led thinking, exactly. And he's thinking about a very superfluous, a very opaque and a very sort of, complicated thing. And he's able to simplify and put a process and deconstruct it and then rebuild it in his head. And it's really incredible because it's like, I've got this messy thought in my head and he's able to give it clarity, right? And it's really powerful capability.
Absolutely. Powerful combination as well. Yeah.
Exactly. And, just going back to your question again, what people built was maybe suitable for the time or for the purpose, but it never really evolved beyond that. So it's like the same thing, just getting reskinned, a new user experience being kind of laid on it. And so
Do you think it's because technology people were actually the ones who are force-fitting certain, I don't know, algorithms, tools, hardware, and it wasn't actually solving the problem, the main problem that restaurants have, which is inventory management, because of the perishable sort of ingredients and how fresh it is, the ordering system, the storage. It wasn't that. Do you think this was the kind of the reason?
So again, you got to go back to the first. This is so fascinating for me. The point of sale was the first product that really got the part of the product. Essentially, if you were to say, but not mine, but just generally, like in the 90s, I think it was, I believe it was NCR that first introduced the point of sale, the digital point of sale, which then later was connected to the internet. Cloud was enabled as well. But let's just say the digital experience of the POS, the touch screen and all of that stuff, which replaced the till essentially, was in the 90s at some point. And it was an accident because what F&B was impressed by, so the product was actually a retail product. It was for retail businesses like merchandising, right?
Yes.
And it was the inventory part of the product that was actually impressive for F&B. That's what they wanted to adopt.
Okay.
So it's like, I'm a restaurateur in the 90s and I see somebody like has a really good cataloging system for like all the stuff that they're about to sell on the racks. And the way they're using it, they have an inventory management, for all their SKUs. It's like, I want to bring this into the restaurant industry. And then you realize like, it doesn't work the same way. And, now you have to zoom back in the 90s, like things didn't get like built fast. They got built very slow.
Yeah.
And by someone who you couldn't even meet. It was like someone sitting, far away in a corner somewhere.
Yes.
And you didn't even anyway, Microsoft, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so they're like, okay, fine. But the POS, that's pretty easy to use. I could just put my items in there and just sell them, right? So there's no like requirement. So we skipped the part of this thing that you're just mentioning about the perishability of something, right?
Yes.
We just skipped the part of the depreciating value of something. And we just went right to the selling of it.
Yes.
And so we prioritized the selling of something throughout the last 35 years. I have this, I think that I say to people when I talk to them about what we do at Jalebi is like, if I went back in time 35 years ago, knowing what I know today about the industry in a post-COVID world, what would I do differently? It would be simply that I would have made the inventory the hero of the story and not the POS. The POS, it was like kind of like going back to the whole thing about fundraising. It's like everyone focuses on the shiny part of the business. You look at the tip of the iceberg, it's all these analogies that come back. You just don't have any idea how big it is underneath. And because you have no idea, the reason why you have no idea is because you have no way of sizing it.
Yes.
Because you have no tools to actually capture the size of it, the gargantuan nature of something. So if you don't have a way of sizing it, you're just going to approximate. An approximation, as you said, it's like an assumption, right?
Yes.
If you build a financial model based on assumptions that you don't have any basis for understanding in the first place, it's going to be wrong to begin with.
Yeah.
The fundamentals wrong. Poop in, poop out.
Yeah, you can't exactly.
And so what happened was like, and now what we find is like over time as we're kind of building, and a lot of people who are trying to do this now as well, they may have more mature products than we do. Maybe they have more sales and revenue, but they do not have the knowledge that we do. And I can tell you this with certainty. If we sat, I would be able to stand toe to toe with some of the biggest players in inventory right now and be able to challenge them and the things that they've done, because there are questions that I would ask them that they failed to serve because they didn't go to a certain point or they didn't go deep enough to understand something. It's like you failed in your job. Because your responsibility as a founder to build that company was to really understand the problem and the nature of the problem and then build a way to solve it, right?
At a fundamental level as
well, not at a
superficial level. Yeah.
Some people did it really well at a fundamental level, but then they didn't understand how broad it needed to get, right? And so where they lacked was, failing is not like making a lot of money and exiting. Failing is like you didn't serve the needs of the customer, because if today that's not the standard, like what Microsoft did was it became the standard, not the gold standard, but it became the standard for document creation, right? Before that was like Fox Pro or whatever.
And
Microsoft came in and just kind of like expanded, and then as they were about to die out because of cloud technology, they quickly came out with Office 365.
Yes.
And that completely revolutionized the way that document, and then obviously subscriptions came in. So Microsoft is always like, no matter how clunky we say they are, they're at the bleeding edge of that kind of transformation, right? Because they become big enough, right? You got to give Bill Gates credit where credit's due. But, the thing is that the problem is the gap is the user of the product and the person building the product, they don't talk enough. And this is where customer discovery is so important. It's because they don't know how to begin to talk to each other, because it's like the thing that we...
Whose responsibility it is? Is it the builder or the customer? Obviously the builder, right?
So, this is a really fascinating question. And it goes back to something that you and I talked about a while ago. I feel like I've been here for like 6 hours, by the way. And I don't suddenly I'm having this I'm just losing my sense of space and time because it's just so comfortable. Anyway, you said something about how, when people don't understand each other, right? Or talk about advice and things like that without context and stuff, right? This is what it is. If you think about the basics of communication, why do you feel you're a successful business person? It's because you see something that other people don't. And so therefore you pass that knowledge on to them and in exchange you get compensated, right?
Yes.
And your motivation is that I can dispense my knowledge because I have a way of looking at something. I have critical thinking skills that allow me to monetize a certain aspect of something that is lacking somewhere else. And
Which is the essence of problem solving, right?
Problem solving, exactly, right? And so now you have these two parties, okay? Imagine a relationship between a husband and wife, okay? And imagine that the relationship fractures over time.
Right.
Most of the time, we have the saying in Urdu, katra katra darya ban jata hai. In Arabic, you have the same thing as well. Every drop forms a river.
Right,
okay?
right.
And that's the thing about fractured relationships is
katra,
that...
Katra,
exactly.
Yeah.
The thing about fractured relationships is that the less those tiny moments that you don't give each other, my wife is very focused about this stuff, right? The things that you don't spend time giving each other, eventually a river is going to form and suddenly you're going to find yourselves on opposite sides of the river.
100%.
Right?
100%.
And there's going to be no way for you to even build a bridge to get to the other side. So suddenly you're
away.
This is what the problem is. The problem is that when the intervention of this technology came, people didn't actually, the user of the product was impressed by the product itself. And so they never really said, hey, listen, this is the thing, but I would love it if this thing happened, right? And so what happens is the POS got better. Because the POS was getting so much attention, people just okay, well, I'm a product person, I'm a product designer, I'm an engineer. I see someone is having friction and using this I'm going to go back and make a better version. And they'll come on with a better version and it'll be 2.0 of whatever the last thing was, right? And 3.0 and 4.0. So we're basing stuff on assumptions based on what we see, but we don't actually talk to those people. It's like getting people in a room, focus groups.
Yes.
It's very common now. People will get people in a group.
But even focus, I'm research wise, I'm not really fond of focus groups and asking people because obviously people, like you said, they're swayed by the shiny objects, even if they're clients. It's I want more of that, not knowing that it's not really benefiting them. It's the perception of benefiting them.
There's a bias.
There's a bias, which is not a bad thing. That's data point, but if it's the only data point, then obviously there's
no context, right?
There's no context. But if you observe how they're doing things and then applying your own critical thinking and analysis into kind of stitching everything together from the biased and non-biased perspective, from observing how they're doing what they're doing, is okay, you're using it this way. Okay, you're happy, but it's not there's something doesn't add up. You know what I mean? This.
Yes. So I heard this thing the other day and I feel like somehow it relates to what we're talking about right now. So they said there was a person who was outside looking for his lost keys.
Right.
Okay. And he was looking for his lost keys. And then as other people saw him looking for something, they came and asked what's wrong? And he's I lost my keys. And so they just started helping him look for the keys. They're all looking for keys. And then one person asks, do you remember where you left them? And he's inside the house. And they're but then why are you looking here? He's because the light inside the house is not very good.
That's the same thing. Exactly.
Right? It's it's just nobody stops to ask. And when you ask, then you realize, wait a second, we don't even understand the problem. So we're building a solution for a problem we don't understand.
We don't understand. Exactly.
Because you're not the user of the product, but here's the problem is that you never took the time. And so I think the critical thinking, so maybe to answer your question about whose job is it first, I think it's the person who's building it because they're the ones who are going to invest the time and effort and resource in actually building it. So first do the research and try and understand, is there a problem? And if there is with the problem, can you shape the problem? Can you structure it? Can you understand
it really at the fundamental level and not just asking people what is the problem, but actually observing it
because
and
they don't know the problem.
They wouldn't.
They don't know because, when you go and ask, our first interactions with F&B businesses and they were, you go to them and say, okay, what are your top 5 problems, right? And they'd be staff turnover, customers are not walking through the door, supplier irregularity, the rent keeps going up, municipality charges me for leaving the bin out for too long. These are the range of problems. It's which one do I pick, right? And then how are they all tied together? And that was, I have this a concept of the red string.
Okay.
Right? The red string is basically the idea that I always thought about this from my career's point of view. I feel in the early days, I had a very erratic career, right? And as I kind of pitched myself as a candidate for new jobs, I'd have to find like ways of connecting my past experience with my present so that people would see me as like on a track, right? Even though I felt like I was completely chaotic. And I was like, I imagined this red string where I would sew it at the start of my journey and find a way to connect it seamlessly through the whole journey until where I am now. And so when you see the red string, it's taut. It's got to be taut, a taut red string. And the taut red string basically shows you this, the common denominator between your journey, right? And the idea of the red string here is basically with the industry, how do you take discombobulated problems that people are complaining about and worried about, and how do you tie them all together? Like, what's the common thread? What's the line? Exactly. Like, what's the thing that ties them all together?
Right.
Is it the station that's really shiny because everyone's going there? Is it the really stinky station that nobody's going to? Or is it something else that nobody's really talking about because nobody really thinks it's a problem because they don't think it can be fixed?
And that's the competency that entrepreneurs have when they make it, right?
I hope so.
Because the ability to see through things, and that's why once I was just speaking to my wife yesterday about the same thing. I was like, I feel like I'm going into a territory that's completely uncharted. I have zero idea about it. It's absolutely new to me, and that's what gets me excited as a person. I'm more excited in the kind of, that's why I called it escapade, right? Because it's going into places where
it's like reminding me of the Goonies, you know?
Exactly.
It's
just going there. I have no map. I have no track. I'm just going there, and that excites me. The unknown excites me. But the point is, the more I get to know people like you and myself experiencing what it means to not have a salary, not have some sort of a structure that I'm going on, not have a rail, the ability to figure out things, that skill set, it's not about problem solving only. It's not about finding an opportunity
discovery.
And exploring. It's that thinking
it's like
behind
getting on a ship and not knowing if there's even land on the other side of this water.
But still, you're able to figure it out.
And you're still able to find the conviction to make that journey, no matter how treacherous it might be. Because you don't even know what treachery looks like.
The stamina that you have, the ability to kind of have a clear thinking in chaotic environments and chaotic times, the ability to kind of maneuver and talk to people and just make things out of nothing, literally creating value out of thin air, right? Just the ability to, that skill, that sort of metaphysical being that you're kind of shaping as you go along is, well, the moment you have it, I was just telling my wife yesterday, that's why you have people who go from millionaires to zero and then become millionaires in a year.
I know a few people like that.
You know what I mean? Like it's just
mind-boggling.
To them, it's just, I can. It doesn't matter. Take my money. I can make something out of nothing. In a year, they'll be able to make it again and be back there. And I'm like, that's fantastic.
I want to make a plug here for a very good friend of mine. This guy, he was in the run this morning with me. Just give me a second. I'm going to look for this.
I love that.
So he's an entrepreneur. He's building a company called Swiftbox.
Okay.
And hang on a second. He was on a WhatsApp group with me today. Where did we go? Breakfast Club. Here we go. Mo, this is for you.
That's nothing, man.
Message Mo. Shared this.
I was talking about the phone, the nothing phone.
Oh yeah, this is the nothing too. Exactly. I love this phone. So he shared this with me. Where did he share it? Anyway, actually, maybe it's on Spotify. So he basically came up with this song. It's in Arabic. You'll know this song. Jesus, I'm taking way too long with this.
That's okay.
All right. Okay, more upsy.
Don't worry, I can always cut through and make it, seamless, and no one will know.
See.
Or I'll keep it and put you on the spotlight. It's up to me.
I don't mind. It's entirely up to you. You're the artist here, bro. You can do what you want. You do you. There we go. More upsy. Halabi. And so he came up with here we go. Getting closer. Oh my God, where is this? Spotify. Oh, sorry. This is way taking way.
Take your time. It's okay. I have all day.
Here we go. Yeah. Okay, got it. How would you pronounce this? Talai Nazil or something?
Which one?
Just here. I'll highlight this. Oh, this here, the song name. Just read the post and then you can the message and you see.
Hey everyone, Mo from Softbox. Talai Nazil, Talai Nazil,
up and down, right?
The
ups and downs.
Yes.
So he's an entrepreneur. He's building a logistics like a 3PL type of startup. Really cool dude. He was at the run this morning, which we should touch on as well. And so this was his like he's a musician. He sings, his songs writes as well, right?
Okay.
And so he released a song. It's on Spotify, and I'll share it with you as well. It's
called Tala Nazil.
Yeah, Tala Nazil. That's the name of the song. It's fantastic. I'll share it with you. And it's a good song. And like, I mean, melodic. I don't understand Arabic. I have a few words.
It's an Arabic song. Okay.
It's an Arabic song, right? And it's about, you know, the ups and downs, right? And when you were saying what you were saying just now, like really interesting, because an entrepreneur was singing a song about something that's very personal to him, which is like, you know, about the ups and downs. Because
and it's very relatable to every entrepreneur, everyone who actually did. That's why when I said it's exactly like kids, right?
Yeah.
If you meet an entrepreneur who you ask them about the entrepreneurship and the journey, and they don't actually gaze and it's like, yeah, you know, that payment that got delayed,
the one that got away,
that police notice, that court notice that I got is just it's just like hello, oh yeah, sorry, what was
exactly.
that? Like if you don't kind of doze off and just then they haven't done it right, and that is what makes an entrepreneur so exciting to me. I was like, and the funny thing is, I've never known about, like I keep on saying this, and I'm so amazed because I remember exactly myself how I thought, like my thought process when I was in my 30s and my 20s. Zohare, I never knew about the concept of entrepreneurship at all.
Yeah, me neither.
At all, until COVID. Imagine that. Like COVID was a wake-up call for me, and I'm like, all my mind was, okay, get degrees, get certificates, get accreditations. Exactly. Go to your job. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, mind you. I'm just saying that I didn't have the
you
option,
were not exposed
the choice.
To the exactly.
You know what I mean? Like imagine if I have migraines every now and then, and I have these attacks. So imagine if I don't know that there's a pill that I can take that actually removes the pain, then I'll live with it. I was like, you know what? It is part of life. Now, if I know about it and then I choose not to, then to my choices, if it's fine. But the fact that I didn't know about it it's just so mind.
How can you ask a question about a thing you don't know exists?
Exactly. And then the more I know about it, the more I know that this is a certain skill. Now I know that when I see a millionaire and a billionaire who's actually made it through a couple of companies that he sold, he deserves it.
Yeah.
You know what? He deserves to be at the top echelons of society because of what he did and because of the value. It doesn't matter how hard he worked. It doesn't matter how smart he is. Or she, exactly. Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Right? The point here is there's something that they were able to create and they're now able to replicate because of that.
Exactly.
Right? And that's
it's a repeatable strategy.
It's a repeatable strategy. And that itself, it's a learnable strategy. It's a learnable skill that only entrepreneurs will understand. Right? And it's so hard and it's so difficult.
It's very interesting actually, because, we're kind of touching on what we were talking about earlier as well, about like having that dogged sort of like, sort of singular vision about stuff. It's almost like, how do you focus so relentlessly on a sense of purpose with a vision and a destination in mind without becoming, an entrepreneur horse blinders on, right? It's like, I think the thing that a lot of people are, so much being tunnel visioned. It's like, in some ways it's a good thing, but it's only a good thing if you know that you're tunnel visioned. When you don't know you're tunnel visioned, that's where the problem begins. And that's what a lot of people, especially investors, will kind of put you in a box that they think that because you're so dogged, are you too dogged? It's like, who is anybody to evaluate what dogged really means or looks like and it's amazing how many people will be like,
but then how do you know?
I backed a founder who, like went through everything up and down and did everything. And now look at them, they're a unicorn. It's like, okay, so, I mean, what makes you think that I'm not capable of doing that? Like, what's stopping? Well, I don't see the formula. It's like, what do you mean? Like, how, you didn't describe the formula. They are the ones who created for you to be able to invest. You are fortunate that you were able to interact with that person at that point. Yes, fine. They benefited from your thought process, and you saw the vision and they were maybe able to unpack it, but many people could be potential. And of course you don't want to go and spray and pray, but like really to be good at your job.
And that's
is
the
to
thing. That sort of balance that you strike between everything you mentioned is the skill, and it's very hard. But the question is, how do you know that because you don't know what you don't know, right? How do you know that you're tunnel vision? How do you know that you don't have the blinders on?
It's a good question, actually. I think it's ego. I think it's probably the first part. We are all devices of our ego.
Yeah.
At some level or the other, whether we have a lot or very little, we all have ego, because it is the thing that helps us identify with ourselves in some way, shape, or form. Ego is not a bad thing. I think the problem with people and ego is that when they have hubris, right?
Yes.
The problem of hubris is that people have too much ego. They're not willing to actually shake it to be able to, transform, to change, right? And I think that's the first thing. It's like, how those expressions about like recognizing the problem is half the solution, seeing yourself in the mirror, all these anecdotes and everything.
Yeah.
I think that's the first thing, is like really
being true
kind of,
to yourself,
self-awareness.
Yes.
Having a sense of self-awareness is like, okay, what's my 360? What's my 720? And then how do I become tunnel vision on choice, on command? And then how do I zoom out and have like a wider peripheral vision? That's the superpower, I think, is... You're
like an eagle. You're able to fly up, but then go down.
You're able to kind of go down, like, be single-minded, but also be able to zoom out. Have the 30,000 to microscopic, capability without fatiguing yourself, because you need to know how much energy to expend. So, I would say to people, like, the best way to solve a problem, in my opinion, I used to say this a lot, people used to get so annoyed with it. I'm going to say it now because it's been a while. So, this was actually what I'd use as a marketing strategy, right? But it in some way, it kind of goes back to the same thing. It's like, okay, let's say you have to come up with a marketing strategy for something that you've not done before, right? The way I would do it is like, think of it as like deep sea fishing. Okay. Deep sea fishing, you don't take a fishing pole. Deep sea fishing, you take a net. Okay. You go to a net. Now the strategy with the net is that you basically throw it out, not to catch whatever you can, but to see what's there. Right. To understand, like to zone something and say, okay, fine, there's a lot of like shrimp and crab and, bluefin tuna or whatever there is. Throw a couple of nets out, sample the space first, and really kind of get a sense of what the distribution is. What's more, what's less, and then try and figure out, do you want to be niche or do you want to be big market, right? And then when you do that a few times, you've done some initial research that gives you the data points to help you understand, okay, now I understand the composition of the space that I want to go in, right? Yeah. Now I feel, okay, fine, which ones have the highest value? Which ones am I most passionate about? Which ones have the best market? Because each one has its own purpose, its own story. And you have to find a way to be able to connect. I said story, which is like my son pronounces R's as an R. It's really annoying. Anyway, it's him rubbing off on me. And so, just trying to get a composition, right? And then, okay, now I have a strategy. I'm going to go after the least available item in that distribution, because I know now, because there's a demand for it, right? People want that one thing that is very rarely available, and I'll be able to command a higher price for it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now that becomes my strategy.
Higher value, right?
Higher value, and there's fewer of them. Fine. It'll be harder for me to find them, but I can charge the price that will justify the time and effort to actually go and find them, and I can buy a bigger vessel and whatever, right?
So on that point, coming back to the problem and the perception of the problem from the clients and everything else, what was the one misconception that your target clients had that you found it difficult to convince them otherwise? You know what I mean? Like, you saw the problem, you're telling them this is the problem, you've casted your nets, you've sampled, but then it's still a misconception that they didn't.
Why aren't we $1 million company yet, basically? Right? I mean, like, why haven't we seen astronomical growth? This is a great question. And I think this is probably the one that investors ask us the most as well, right? In another way, it's like, it's a saturated market. How will you stand out and be the shiny object that everybody should gravitate to?
Is it saturated, or is it because of the misconceptions that your clients,
Say, I wish you had money right now, because then we'd have a conversation that you would invest in my company. Like, as in, I'm talking like tens of millions, right? As an investor. Not to say that you don't have money, of course. I mean, you didn't do this.
I don't.
Everyone.
I don't. I need that. Okay, my client. I need that project tomorrow. Please send me the contract.
The invoice is already with you. Right? Talk to your finance team. Wallahi, what's going on?
Yeah.
It is the perception that the market is saturated. The problem is, so there are two problems for us, right? The first problem is that we understand the problem at a very molecular level, right? Like really down to a very scientific level. And we're still curious because we feel like there's still about 100 feet below this that we need to discover that nobody's done before, okay? The people who did it stopped at a certain point. You can see that because the product never really evolved. It kind of started going a bit horizontal.
The gas tanks went out, probably.
Gas tanks didn't go out. The cars got bigger, the roads got wider, but people forgot about the pedestrians. How are the pedestrians going to cross the road? How are they going to get to their destination, right?
Other variables that actually, okay.
The people, the actual user of those things, like just got like left out, right? And so if you think about the car analogy again, right? So you've got the tires, you've got the car itself, and a car comes with all kinds of features, right? I mean, at one point, even seatbelts were a feature. They were not a necessity. They were luxury, right? the radio, the DVD player,
thousands
all
and
of those
thousands
things,
of
right?
components.
And as time evolved, and this is, I think, what China has done really well, is that they've kind of understood the formula of how to make the most necessary things that make up the whole thing more cost effective, so they can command a lower price for the same thing that somebody's charging a ton of money for.
Yeah.
And sure, fine, there's this stuff that, it's made in China, so it might break, right? I have a Chinese car right now. I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah, there are things that I wish were better about it. But, for the most part, I had to first get over the stigma of not buying an American car, which is what I previously have had for a long time. And I even had a German car. And they cost me an arm and a leg to keep or maintain or buy or whatever. And so I was like, no, but that's what you do. That's what you buy. You buy an American car because Americans know how to make cars. You buy a German car because they're German engineering, or a Japanese car if you want to go like far out east, right? But no, don't touch China. What does China know about cars? Have you seen the kind of things that they're making? These people really understand what they're doing.
They come from the future, yeah.
And they come not even from the future. They built the future. True. They've pulled the future into the present because they were the ones building it to begin with.
Yes.
All the parts that go into everything are made in China. They just figured out, hey, if we're going to give them the parts, why not just build the damn thing ourselves as well?
Yeah.
Because we're the source. We're the supply chain. The problem is that everybody's so fixated on the stuff that they've been essentially trained. It's like, again, the same thing about like, I got to get educated. I got to get a job. I got to get married. I got to be a father or mother. And I have to, those things. And then suddenly it's like, entrepreneurship. That's interesting. I discovered entrepreneurship properly for the first time, even though I'd started building my first company in 2005. But I only learned about what entrepreneurship was in 2015.
Oh, wow.
Or 14, actually, when I went to the Web Summit, right? That's the word really started to make sense. So when I started my digital agency, my title on the card, because I couldn't be like an operational role because I had a full-time job, and in those days it was big taboo. You couldn't do anything other than the job. It was illegal in Dubai, right?
Yeah.
So, I come from like that time as well here. I was kind of a bit of a, a rebel. So my wife, who, joined essentially was the CEO of the company, but she actually ran the company, right? So we didn't it wasn't like, she's going to just sit on the title. She's actually she ran the company. She did a damn good job. My title on the card was founder. And the first thing my wife, because she hates fluff. She hates this like frothy stuff. Mean? She's like, what the hell is a founder? What did you found? What is a founder? What does a founder do? What's your job?
It's not utility. It doesn't have utility.
It doesn't have utility because there was no value for it. It was still a very early title. And you didn't see it on business cards. It was like CEO, because it was like people needed to do something that was relatable, right? Because you got to do something. And here I am, like, I got to find a way to have a title for myself because I can't be titleless, but then I cannot have a functional role. So like, founder is interesting. And I don't know where I first heard it or maybe it was a Web Summit or something, but it just felt like the right title to have because it's like you're everything and nothing.
Yes.
It's like you're there, but you're not there. And it was like you're hiding in plain sight, essentially,
yes.
right?
You're saying something in the
it's like people, it's like you question it because you feel like you're an idiot, but then you don't because you don't want to look like an idiot. So you're like, okay, it's there, whatever, right? Like you have a radio, clock, tissue box holder, and we're not going to talk about that, right? Why? It doesn't matter. It looks cool. That's it.
That's it. Yeah.
And so for us, it was like we didn't want to do something different because we wanted to be different. We wanted to actually kind of really understand. Our whole mission was really kind of figure out something that is difficult, but not difficult for the sake of being difficult because we don't want to make our lives miserable. Find a real problem that nobody's really tackled yet, and it's huge. Not because it's huge, but because it's really causing a tremendous amount of agony. So much agony that, like, if we were to relate it to, and not to make it controversial, but anyone who's struggling in their life and gets attuned to that struggle.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just accepts it as a part of life. It's like, you talked about migraines. Yes. I've got a few anecdotes. I used to suffer massively from cluster headaches for many years. Painful. And I conquered them. No medication. And I'll tell you about this. But it's like you've got this thing and you're just like, I will live with it because I can't figure out what to do about it. Right? There are medicines, there are doctors, but then like, how much time am I going to go and try and figure this out? So I'm just going to accept it and it's just going to be a part of my life and I'll just move on. Right? Exactly. Right. And this is kind of where it comes down to the genesis of what Jalebi is really about. It's like we ended up by accident. We kind of hopped over the swamp and tried to avoid it. But then because somebody once said, all the hundreds of people we talked to, the one person who said, hey, you should look at inventory as the core part of the business, because this is really, and they kind of gave us the logic and it's stuck in my head, right? Everyone in my team actually just kind of skipped over it. And I tried to bring them back. And then finally one day I had to take an extreme measure. You know, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but we were in the Techstars Accelerator and we were kind of in the second week of it. And our model was their menu management software like Gloria Foods, which was that year acquired by an undisclosed, like I think 8-digit figure sum by Oracle. And it was a freemium menu management software that can give you build your digital menu. But it, you know, for me, it was always like, but what's more?
Still crust level.
Is primordial the word for it? Is it like, what's more like primitive? What's more basic than that? Like what makes the menu, right? Like what is the most granular that you can get with this, right? What is the grain of salt?
Yeah.
And that's my fixation. I was like, I want to get to the bottom. I'm like, really like, I'm like a dog with a bone, right? And we made this extreme decision. Okay, we're going to make a U-turn. This is 6 months later. We're going to make a U-turn. We're in the Accelerator. I only had this one thought. Was sitting in this, like we had these Sunday stand-ups where we talk about, the previous week's performance the next week. And we just gone through this grueling 2-week like mentor madness where you're talking to like dozens of people with advice. You know, some is just junk and some is very useful. But after these 2-week, like 20-minute speed dating sessions where people were trying to pitch to and also convince them that our idea is really good, you know, the two things that boiled up were most of the people, we had to struggle to explain to them what we do, which is a problem. Like if we can't articulate what we're trying to do to any number of people, that means the problem is here.
True.
And then the second thing is,
is
exactly right. And then the second thing is that even when they do understand it, they're not like, there's no like light bulb or eureka. It's just like, it feels like it's going to be meh. And also like probably 1,000 other people. Actually, there are 1,000 other people doing it.
Yeah.
And I sat there one day and I was just thinking, you know, in 15 weeks, we're going to be standing on stage and this is a big bet they took on us, right? And I cried the day they accepted us in the Accelerator, like literally. And they showed the video later on as well.
Which one? N5 or?
No, Techstars.
Techstars.
In Saudi.
Oh.
And I sat there and I just thought, you know, like it's 2 weeks already gone by. It's a 15-week program. And in 13 weeks, I'm going to be standing on stage and I have to pitch an idea that I believe in. And I don't believe, suddenly I don't have conviction in what we're doing. And it's like an existential crisis. I just sat there and I just said, co-founders, like, listen, guys, I got to do something. You got to trust me. I'm going to do something really drastic. They're used to me doing wild stuff, but this was like, stood up when it was my turn. And I'm like, guys, I have nothing to report. We're basically going to drop everything we've been building so far. And we're going to start building an entirely new product from today. And it's going to be inventory focused. It was like gasps in the room. And the only person who was actually overjoyed by this was the managing director of the Accelerator, Vijay. And at the start of the Accelerator, he said to us that 80% of you are going to witness a drastic change in a business model. And he used the word pivot. We don't like to say pivot because we think that pivot also means like it's like we moved away from our, but we actually went backwards. Like 6 months ago, we met a guy, ran a restaurant. We went back to go deeper.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, what did we skip over? And there was a guy we met, he was a restaurant operator in Sharjah. And, we just had a meeting of the minds. It was fascinating. I was walking, doing like door-to-door knocking. And this one guy I met, Jordanian guy, super tall, runs a cafe in Muwela. And, we just, walked in. I was like, look, I'm not trying to sell anything. I just want to like ask a few questions, trying to get to the bottom of this thing I'm trying to understand. And, and I asked him like, what are some of the things? And he's like, I just wish that the back and the front were like connected somehow. I was like, so through a system. And I was like, and I showed him a visual.
Practically the inventory and the POS.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's just like one system that just unifies all of it. Right. It's like not have a standalone and not a POS with an inventory. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
I get to this a bit. Right.
Okay.
I know I'm belaboring, but I guess like it seems like I can do this, I suppose. I don't know. You're allowing me, you're giving me the permission. So, and he said, just as one, and I took out my laptop and I showed him a visual that we have on our presentation. And it was a manifestation of what he just said. It was exactly that on a slide. That was our thesis, was to build this. What we were trying to figure out was, where do we dig our first hole? We didn't want to start digging until we actually understood where the most delicate pressure point was.
Right.
And also, so this is where we were tactical. We didn't want to go where other people were because we didn't want to step on toes. We didn't want to have friction in acceptance. That will come with time, but we didn't want to go where a lot of people would be pissed off or offended. Like, if we went in where we would take business away from someone else.
At least you need to have a backbone.
We had exactly, right? And also because you want to go where people have just generally ignored because it don't feel like it's an important part. Everyone's ignored it. And he said that. And then, in another meeting when I brought my co-founder and And he kind of explained to us how he does his food preparation. He gets the raw material from the supplier, and then he separates. It's like, let's say he's making his burgers. He puts his French fries, measures them, put them in little plastic bags in the fridge or the freezer, whatever. So when he needs to prepare the food, it's down to exact measurements, right? Which is pretty much what you did with a coffee, which is what people who care about what they do will do typically, right? And he's like, I manage this on Excel, and I just wish there was a way for me to do this easier. He didn't know what the solution was because he just didn't really understand the problem. But all he said was that if this was better, it would be better. And I thought myself, it's like an Interpol agent, right? Follow the money. Where's the money flowing from, right? Money goes out to buy something. Money comes in from selling something. What happens in between? The thing you've bought is not the thing you're selling. It has to transform. The transformation has a process. There's a time and effort involved. There's going to be some kind of things that happen as a result of that. There's going to be waste. There's going to be output. There's going to be unforeseens. Someone took a few steaks home that day, right? How do you track that? How do you know that there's a variance until it's too late?
Right.
And then how do you know that it's possible to do something, because it'll just keep happening because there's no way to track it.
Yeah.
There's
you
no
can't go
repeatable.
around accusing people as well.
Exactly, right? You're going to piss off your best staffer. Cannot do that, right? And so there was no way to actually gather evidence to begin to even understand the evidence, let alone to be able to use it meaningfully. And this is where, for us, it became really we started geeking out on this. And so, funny story, 6 months later, we were in the Accelerator, we're back in Dubai. We were doing the program in Riyadh, so we were living there for 4 months. Back in Dubai, called this guy up. He'd been ghosting me for a while, by the way, which is kind of annoying. And then turns out that he had been having some challenges, had a falling out, with his business partner, and the restaurant shut down. And I was like, that sucks, because he's the first person to sign a contract with us. He was actually our first customer. I told my co-founder, and my co-founder, he's completely crazy, by the way. He's also the one who came up with the name of the company. So he does that, right? And it's me always resisting, right? Until I find a way to accept it. And he does that. He pushes me to do odd things, but then I'm the one who has to action it, right? Because I'm then ultimately responsible. He said, why don't we offer him a job? I'm like, what's that restaurant guy going to do in our company? He's like, what's he not going to do? We need his knowledge.
Yes.
The best way to have it is to have him with us.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, that's a great idea. I guess it makes sense. So we called him over and we said, look, we don't have a lot of money. We don't have any money. We can offer you this. He's like, okay, fine. I'll take it. I was like, this is really weird. Are you desperate? And he's like, no, I'll figure it out. Whatever.
That's amazing.
2 years later, he's still with us. 2.5 now. Actually, 3 years now, in fact,
That's
in December.
amazing. And I'm sure the value of his knowledge and experience that he brought to the table is just unlimited.
He was the hero of my story. When we did our demo day pitch, he was the hero of the story. It basically all went down to Ahmed and his intervention in our journey and how we ignored it and then came back to it. And, credit where credit is due. For us to really appreciate the value of something, we had to be able to gather a lot of data points and ignore some stuff, because some stuff just signals are noise, right? How do you reduce the signal to noise ratio?
Yeah.
And this is kind of where we kind of had the genesis of what Jalebi would become. So January 2022 is when we actually started building the tech properly.
Oh, wow.
We threw everything away that we'd been doing. So 2020 to 2022 was just this. It was just
going around between accelerators, clients.
Exactly, right? Putting pitch decks out, getting rejected 99,000 times. We got rejected by everybody. Techstars rejected us the first year we applied. We applied a second time with a follow-up on what have we done since the last time you rejected us.
Which is a good thing, right?
It's an amazing thing. It's perseverance.
Exactly. But also, you want to have higher barriers to entry, because that's what makes it more exciting, isn't it? And makes it more prohibitive for people who are,
laissez-faire,
a lifestyle thing. I'm an entrepreneur. I like to have a few clicks on my LinkedIn profile.
Entrepreneur magazine will do an article on me, and that'd be cool.
Exactly. And that'd be cool. And you want to kind of remove those out, filter them out, and have the real ones. And that's why I love going into a program that actually rejects me multiple times, because I know that the rejection came, especially if it's on merit, the rejection come in a way that makes me want to be a better person, a better, let's say, value add individual or entity to be worthy of that acceptance, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And I think, this really ties into, it's a generational thing. I think you and I, because we share so much in age and experience in some ways, it really has a lot to do with I remember I had a distinct feeling that I had when I felt like suddenly something was different in the air. What would later become, as we know it, a sense of entitlement.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
today there are countless founders and people in my age group too, by the way, believe it or not, who have this sense of entitlement that not because you got in, so I should be able to get in, but like that still, it's like, well, if you got in, then show me the way, or like nominate me, or warm intro me. And I do that. I do it like, I do it for people that I want to like win. And
you believe in probably.
I don't even need to believe in them. I believe in the individual, not what they're doing.
Oh, that's what I'm trying to say, the person.
Exactly, right? Because I like them, and not like because I want to like them. It's just like, they've asked me, so how can I say no?
Okay.
Right? Like there's that sincerity and like, okay. And if I can help them, because look, ultimately it's up to the person at the end of it, like the decision makers, the committees, whatever, for them to decide. My job is to get them to the door. Yeah. Right. If I can get them to the door without losing any skin off my back, and it's not costing me anything,
that's my point.
I'm not going to charge them for this. This is not like, this is just me paying it forward.
Why
right?
not? Yeah, exactly.
But there's this sense of entitlement that I'm getting rejected. What am I supposed to do? Like, it's like, but didn't you just get rejected by girls when you were trying to ask them out when you were young? Didn't you get rejected by a school? Didn't your parents reject you every time you asked to do something?
The fear of failure, right?
Yeah, it's just like people just don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to accept it because it's just like becomes this. And I'm just like, but that's part of the process. The process is not something that we've accepted. It is what we make of it. But the rejection is the indicator that what you're doing the same thing again, expecting a different result is a sign of insanity. Yeah. Unless you're Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb, and he found 99 ways not to make a light bulb, right?
Yeah.
It's doing the same thing differently, trying to expect a different result. And when you try and do something differently, it's like failing a bunch of times with the same goal in mind, but with a different output expected as a result, because you ultimately want to get the yes. How do you get the yes, right? You persevere.
And the taste of that yes is so much more joyful and sort of,
people don't have the patience for it.
Gratification is much higher. But I'll tell you what.
It's like people want someone else to do the run for them.
So that's the thing. That's the thing.
That's a service, by the way.
That's a service.
That's actually a thing.
I've heard about it. Yeah, it's like someone wants to, you pay someone to do Hajj for you or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, I'll tell you what.
That outsourcing you're talking about.
Outsourcing that I started with.
Yeah.
It got nuts. And that's why sites like Upwork and Fiverr and others is just booming, and freelancers are booming because now they can get, and I tried it. You know, I'm kind of guilty of that. But I tried it to know, right? Yeah. I tried it to know, not with the intention to know and learn, with the intention of this is how things are done, right? A website, fine, okay, I'll get a website done for me for, I don't know, 6,000 dirhams, 10,000 dirhams. And obviously that's not the website that I ended actually doing. I did my own website myself, and I learned how to do it, and I went, you know what I mean?
You're not satisfied with what you had.
I was not, but the thing is, I didn't know any better. And I wish someone, like if I go back to my old self when I started, I would say just the first thing that you do is just go into the weeds. Make sure that you know the infrastructure of your own building that you're building. Make sure that you know it like the back of your hand.
Is the foundation even strong enough to hold the house?
Exactly, to hold the house. You can't build on things that, like, I'm so grateful for that individual who I hired that he didn't do a good job, because if he did, guess what? I wouldn't be where I am right now. And I know that for sure, right? Yeah. Now, maybe you could argue that, oh, you could have done something else. And yeah, of course, we can always argue for that.
Yeah,
but
you can either regret or say hindsight 2020, right?
Exactly. You can always have it. I mean, everybody's smart in hindsight, right? The thing is, the ability, I mean, to me, the learning is not the website itself. Yeah. It's that stamina. It's that sort of attention to details. It's that stubbornness to kind of know how things work, and then willingly outsource it to someone else, because now you know. And the good thing is now, because I know how things work, when I outsource, I don't need to outsource to a very smart, expensive person. I can outsource it to a kind of junior person who I can tell him mechanically how to do things, and then he can grow or she can grow with me, and I can be their mentor to grow this thing. And then once they know how to do it, they can get creative. But at the same time, they didn't kind of create a big hole in my business. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because I'm able to systematically and sort of mechanically tell them what to do because I've done it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that's what I'm trying to say. So let's kind of zoom out a bit. Let's zoom out a bit. How do you see our region when it comes to its conduciveness to entrepreneurship and startup venture building?
Man, I'm going to upset a lot of people.
Please do. Because everyone sat on that chair was politically correct to the moon and back. This show is about being pragmatic, about being real, because if we don't confront our own issues, there's no way that we're going to be able to fix them, right?
It's what we started with. Like, how do you make it better if you don't innovate, right? How do you get out of the box?
Yeah.
I think that I have some friends who are very dear to, right? And they're dear to me. And they are very critical of what it's like to be an entrepreneur here, right?
Relative to other parts of the world, right?
You know, I think it's just relative to what it probably could be. Other parts of the world just set those standards, but we're all just people, right? If we choose to live in California and build a startup versus living in Hong Kong or living in Delhi, it's really a matter of like our choices and our circumstances that allow us to be able to use the environment to our advantage to make something that's impactful.
Fair enough.
But who hasn't built a great e-commerce was a result of SARS.
Right.
Right. Dubai has been the trading post of this entire like region for as long as time, right?
Yes.
Before it was Dubai.
True.
And so it's just evolved around its own nature, right? When you don't understand the nature of something, then it's really hard to be able to kind of label and box it. And then you cannot transform it into something it isn't, right? Today, Dubai is realizing its true potential, not realizing it, but, you know, let's give Sheikh Mohammed his credit, of course, because he's got so much vision and he's able to execute on that. But the consistency of his leadership that has over time shown how tall the tallest building can look. But it's not because it's the tallest building. It's the fact that the feat of human engineering is able to actually go above and beyond anything that ever has existed before. People very quickly judge something and say, you know, the biggest building, oh, they've just got the biggest this. Man, do you know what goes into building the biggest anything? That's the feat. If you're chasing after a Guinness Book of World Records, wherever, it's the same thing. You're trying to outdo everybody else.
Why don't others do it as well?
That's what competition is, right?
Yeah.
It's
no easy feat, and it's
not an easy feat, right? So when I zoom back down to like this idea of whether the region is great for entrepreneurship, I think that so you have to look at the patterns. Like I worked in telecom for a while, right? And in telecom, we always used to look at, so again, infrastructure, really kind of how do you deliver the thing that allows people to do the best thing they can? Because you're just trying to sell something at very low margins, right? You got to sell them in high quantities, so large volumes, right? And you can't like take a big cell tower that costs you $200,000 and then figure out how like, you know, charging someone 5 fills to speak to their loved ones is going to break even on that cost of the tower. Now you have to have 200 of those towers. So you're going to spend like a few $1 million and bet on the fact that people are going to want to talk to their loved ones, right? That's the first telecom company, was it AT&T or whatever it was, right? And so over time, like you take these bets on building infrastructure.
Yes.
The infrastructure that you may have this propensity to understand that it could become the foundation of great stuff on top of it.
Yeah.
Right? The OTT or whatever we want to call it, right? This region, fortunately or unfortunately, skipped a few parts of that process because of the wealth of the region. Specifically, we're talking about GCC, right? It's like taking the fast lane at the immigration counter versus getting in line with everybody else, right? You're going to get to the same place. You're just going to take longer. The people who have the resource, the ability to get to the fast lane will take that because, well, why shouldn't I? I value my time. I've got the resource. So I'm going to put the two together and get to the other side, and I'll be ahead of the queue, and I'll be ahead, right? The problem is that and not to kind of make it like an accusation, because that's not what it is. It's just when circumstances are different for you, right? There are opportunities here to make things incredibly better. Yeah. There is need, there's necessity. True. Now, if we spread the region and say, okay, let's say MENA.
Yeah.
Okay, so Middle East and North Africa.
Yeah.
Now, when you go to the North Africa part, circumstances change drastically. You look at Egypt, 100+ million people, True. Big market opportunity for anyone who's trying to disrupt whatever, but huge market resistance because it's a very old civilization that has done things, you know, slowly changing over time, but you know, good things don't happen fast, right?
The maturity level is different.
It's exactly, and it's harder to change things that are set in certain ways, right?
Yeah.
Here, it's interesting because there was more of a mindset of change that welcomed the change, right? Let's say Saudi Arabia has seen a lot of that change in the last, let's say 5-7 years, which is quite significant. For even within Saudi, people are just mesmerized by that level of change, True. Right? In Dubai, it took us 35 years to get to where we are today.
True.
To be able to have this interaction, for me to be able to have, the lifestyle that I have, to be able to live here and feel like I just belong here, right? Dubai had a desire to create an environment and an ecosystem that was welcoming for all. Recently, a gentleman passed away, Colm McLaughlin.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, God rest his soul. He was a titan of industry, not just an icon, but he was a titan, right? Like he transformed duty free.
True.
He was, I think he's Scottish or Irish.
Irish. I think. I'm not sure.
And, an Irish person in Dubai in the 80s.
Yeah.
With a single runway airport and a small terminal and 2 planes. And today, who doesn't want to fly through Dubai? Fly by Dubai. Fly by Dubai. Just rolls off the tongue. Win a car. $1 million. Win a car. Like you create this and it's like, well, you got to get someone to bankroll it. And who's going to bankroll it? Someone who's got the wealth. Now, that for me is like seizing an opportunity. It's like that's where the difference between solving a problem and create and pursuing vision comes in.
Yes.
Like these are now 2 different things.
Absolutely.
Okay. There was vision to make something out of nothing. And not to say that Dubai was nothing. It was more than nothing. It was something of substance, but it was only to the local people and people who had been through here and seen something and either settled or passed through. Because that's trading, right?
Yes.
That's what trading posts are. Historically, some people settle and some people come and go because they're traders. That's what they do. The people who stayed were the ones who were like, there's a bigger opportunity here. Let's make something of it. And they stayed. You have a huge South Asian community that came and settled here.
True.
Other people from the Arab world also did. And the South Asians who are probably struggling a different kind of struggle in that time, they were escaping something or trying to create new opportunities, whatever. Now, your question is a very loaded question because it really comes down to like, what do we know about a thing? What do we know about entrepreneurship as a thing? What do we know about the region? What do we know about the history of the region? And what do we know about the evolution that allowed that history to blend into the present? How did that history, because Dubai has an amazing, I mean, we keep saying Dubai, it's actually the UAE. And Dubai is not a country, it's a city, right? Like, But I think the world has like this misconception because Dubai has just been the shining jewel of this.
It's the brand, right?
It is the brand, right?
Yeah.
But it's just done such a great job of standing out that, it's the thing that attracts people here. But then people who come here will find probably you'll see a lot more people settle in Sharjah and they see.
But that's
Abu Dhabi.
what great cities do, right? They
attract
shine
you.
and
London,
they attract
Paris,
you,
New York.
and then it just spills around everything around it. Yeah,
then
yeah,
you just kind of spread out, right? And then people look for other opportunities, right?
True.
Or they try to get away from the mess, right?
True.
The noise, whatever. So when we talk about entrepreneurship in the region.
And by the region, I don't mean political borders. I mean the region as a block of people and land, like you said, like the whole region.
Yeah, as a physical landmass where people congregate, right?
Where you can find problems or opportunities and then you pursue them to whatever aim that you want to do. So
Correct.
how is that because entrepreneurship is about you, the internal, and then the external, the market, right? And the market has all of the dynamics and the moving variables and targets that you have zero, like infinite number of variables that you have zero influence on, but it influences you, right?
Correct.
So how is that the market to entrepreneurship? And that's, it's very important to ask that question because if there are things that we can kind of put a spotlight on for someone to listen to and then maybe make it better.
So I have this thesis that to spark innovation, you got to look at the patterns of like how did innovation happen in North America and in California, for example, right? Like what is unique about Silicon Valley? What is unique about One Hacker Drive? What is unique about Palo Alto that other cities are trying to replicate, right? Is it like the people are just drinking a different kind of water?
Is that the right notion to replicate?
I was going exactly what I wanted to get to. And this is kind of ties into my point, right? Is the difference between innovating and replicating, right? And innovation doesn't have to be creating something new from scratch. It can be making something better. Or it doesn't have to be making the thing better, but it's actually understanding the need or the problem better to build something that might be different from what was there always. Kind of like what we're trying to do.
Exactly.
It's like,
that.
It's a bit askew, like 2 degrees to the left, but it's fundamentally different because of the process and the way that it works, right? Or the logic which follows. And that's really, I think we don't. So this morning we were going for the run with, the Minister of Economy, Abdullah bin Touk. Amazing dude, really cool, like to sort of hang out with him, take selfies. He was actually leading the pack. And not because people are being polite, he's a runner. And he was actually ahead, and there was like about 50 odd people there, right? And really, like, he's a leader, and he embodies the essence of what UAE is. The leaders do the job of leading. And then there are the followers who is not a bad thing, but they follow because they're inspired by the leader.
Yes.
Because the leader is leading. Right? They're setting that benchmark and constantly beating it themselves. And somebody said, this is not the right place to build a company.
Oh.
Right? Somebody, like, it was just like me, and we were running, and somebody said this, right? And not in those words exactly, but to that effect.
The meaning,
right?
the
the meaning was like, it's not the right place to build a company. And it's not that I agreed, but I didn't disagree, because I feel like the thing that you need here, so there are two things that I think you need to be able to create a real ecosystem where entrepreneurs can thrive.
Okay.
The first thing is the basic thing. Is the thing that allows us to survive. Is the cost of living. If I cannot sustain my livelihood, I cannot put food on the table, I cannot afford my rent, I cannot put my kid through school, then how can I do anything that I feel passionate about? Because passion is a luxury. It's secondary to my survival. If my survival is compromised, how can I do anything other than worry about my survival? And if I'm perpetually worried about my survival, what am I doing? I'm becoming numb to the reality.
Obviously, you'll always focus
massively
on that,
reduced. No matter how smart I am, no matter how capable I am, I am suppressed. I am incapable of being my best self because the circumstances don't allow me to do. My wife and I talked about this, and we had, again, like, all credit to her. Like, she really said, like, entrepreneurship is the rich people's game. It's a thing of privilege.
Unfortunately,
It is. And you cannot be an entrepreneur because the basic necessity is get a job so you can put food on the table because you get a regular month check. Be regular. Thing is that people get so stuck in that, and then there's antsy, and then they get out, but they don't know how to get out in a transitionary format, right? Like, they just jump, and then suddenly they're like, oh shit, this is a bad idea, right? They drown. I transitioned. I took 18 months, even after like years of like wanting to do it.
Same here.
And, she said this, and at first I was like, what are you talking about? Like, and then I really thought about it. I was like, yeah, I mean, I have, like, I'm comfortable. Like, my dad did well enough that I was able to sustain, and, I'm grateful to God that, he made my father capable and gave him this. My father broke through veils of like controversy, and he became the person he did because of just his contrarian point of view about stuff, because he was very fixated. He had like tremendous amounts of integrity. He has this idea and principle that is so deeply embedded in his soul. It's immovable. And for a large part of his life, he really kind of instilled that in us. But then eventually he's like, okay, you got to be your own person as well, right? I'm not going to overshadow you. You have to make your own life, whatever, right? And she said this, and she's very firm on her feet. And she said, it's like, it's only for rich people. And at first my natural reaction was like, what are you talking about? Like, I mean, it's kind of offensive, but actually it's true. We're so afraid of actually identifying the real nature of the beast. If you don't have some kind of security, then you can't build a company. So you see where I'm getting at, right?
And imagine the opportunity lost there.
Yes. And
from
so
that segment of people that could potentially have brilliant ideas and put it into action, but we're not able to kind of highlight them because they're busy putting food on the table.
Exactly. Now you ask me the question, what is the region for entrepreneurship, right?
But that's the same in London. That's the same
No, it's not.
Oh.
Okay. You know how much it costs to set up a company in London? A lot less than it costs here. Do you know how many times you have to pay to renew the license for in London? Probably never, except the first time. In the US, you pay for a license once, and then you pay your taxes and stuff, right? But you don't pay the same amount that you paid the first time to keep the license.
Right.
It's your company. You made it, right? And you pay taxes to maintain it.
True.
The renewal of the license itself is a tax.
This is one of the pain points that I have.
Okay, now if I have to spend $5,000 a year to maintain just the license of the company, and then on top of that, all the other stuff, that's a cost of doing business.
What's the value?
Where's the money coming from? Right. So this is the thing that we have to understand. It's like creating a monetary opportunity means, what are we taking away from someone in order to give them back some value?
Right.
In exchange for that money, right? Now, are we taking away more than they can sustain to make it difficult for them to do that? That, I think, creates an imbalance and an unfair advantage for people who have versus those who have not. Now you see where I'm going, right?
Yeah.
this is what I was saying. I was going to upset a lot of people, and I might upset like people. But this is what we need.
No, that's pragmatic. It's true.
Here.
I can feel it myself. Yeah. I mean, every year, like
I'm feeling the pinch. My co-founder is feeling the pinch. We
can go up to sometimes 100,000 if you have visas. If you have, I don't know, like
It does. I can tell you that from first-hand experience. That's exactly what it is, right? And you have to figure out like, how do I sustain that now?
Especially in the early stages where you're scrambling for revenue and scrambling for
Now we go back to like the difference between a product and service. Wow. I'm trying to build a product company. I need time to be able to, what do? I have to pay bigger salaries.
3 years, 4 years.
Exactly. Now in the States, right, engineers cost a huge amount of money, right? A good engineer, big back-end engineer, if I hired in the States, I'd be paying north of like $200,000, $300,000 a year. A lot of money. I could run a company on that much.
Exactly.
Because I can hire like, folks from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, whatever, whether they're here or there, it doesn't matter because they're, more cost effective. But those are my choices.
It's a choice. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, when I don't have the choice and I'm limited by the limitations create their own like limitations, then I have to choose within those limitations. I see entrepreneurs with the true spark, the fire of entrepreneurship. Like I belong to a community called the Founders Community, where it was like one of the first people we were actually having a physical meeting, and it was during Ramadan like a year and a half ago, and it turned into like, now we're like over 4,000 entrepreneurs around the world. And there's like 3 WhatsApp groups. It was one, and then it exploded, and it's amazing. Right. We meet every Friday. I don't go, unfortunately, as often as I'd like to, but they've become very organized, and it's organized and maintained by this company called Ahoy. Jamil Shinawi is the CEO of the company. There's 3 co-founders, really amazing people, but they've really taken it on themselves to like sustain that. And they're creating what is like an ecosystem and environment to enable entrepreneurs, right? They're giving them access to a lot of things. They're actually giving each other. And it's such a heartwarming, I invite you to come on next Friday. Every Friday they have something, right? I want you to come there, just see for yourself, right? No one's afraid of asking questions. Nobody's afraid of looking dumb.
This topic has been put on the table
many times. It's something that people feel, right?
But has it been put on
I don't know if this specific thing has been talked about in this way. I haven't spoken about it in this way. I mean, I do it like, maybe behind closed doors, maybe in private conversations, but I don't talk about it very publicly because I also don't want to become like,
negative.
Negative Nancy, right? And that's not the idea. The idea is how do you make something better? So it's like really kind of constructive criticism. How do you take something that isn't working and make it better? So the first thing is the cost of living. Okay, because you asked like, what are the things? And I said, what is it? And I said, there are 2 things.
Right.
First is the cost of living. Okay. If you get the cost of living thing sorted, exactly, right? It's fatal because you can't supplement cost of living by taking debt.
Yeah,
I can't borrow money from the bank, which I don't have any guarantee I can pay. And this is the other difference. It's like putting
another dagger in yourself when you have already 2.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's the difference again. When you look at like what other economies are doing. So you can attract all the best talent here to live here because it's a great lifestyle.
Yes.
But lifestyle only makes a better lifestyle or a worse lifestyle. But now here's the thing. When you look at other markets, what is the other thing that makes them like in the cost of living, specifically that one point, is that I can finance my needs at a much lower cost and lower risk profile because the infrastructure of the country, it enables and it allows, right?
The entrepreneurship ecosystem.
It's not the entrepreneurship ecosystem. It's the regulatory framework.
That's what I'm trying to say. So the enablements and the padding around the entrepreneurship ecosystem
I can take a small business loan, right? And I don't have to worry about being on the street. I can't pay the loan back because there'll be ways for me to manage that. That's not the case here. I can't get a loan to begin with because I don't have anything to collateralize.
Yeah.
And, it's funny, actually. I'll tell you, funnily enough, a person who's earning 20,000 dirhams a month in salary has a higher chance and a higher credit line capability than I do as an entrepreneur if I have, let's say, 200,000 dirhams in the bank.
Yeah.
That's my collateral, but the bank doesn't look at that. They look at me as a high risk profile because...
But the devil's advocate here is, okay, the
what if I take the money and run?
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about people...
We learned from 2008.
Yes.
Okay, there were Ferraris in the streets, keys in the car. We learned from that.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that Dubai does that the rest of the world does not understand, and this is the gem, and this is what we're going to lead to point 2.
Yeah.
Is that Dubai learns from what happens and how it gets like hurt by something
100%.
And it immediately moves in to fix it. I have this idea that Dubai is recession proof. The reason why it's recession as a city, okay, I'm not talking about the people within the city, but I'm talking about the city. It is resilient because when there's a recession happening anywhere, even in Dubai doesn't let you feel it. In fact, if anything, it resists it and makes things more expensive. It's like when there is a recession, things go down, but here things go up. right? So you know that gradually, even if it's a little bit, it'll go up, right? Fine, you know, you've got recent circumstances around the region which have caused more people to come here, which means more money is coming here, which means the cost is going to go up because people can make more money, right? That's opportunistic. And that's also a bubble, so, you know, it will stabilize at some point. But that's different, right? We're longevity. We're talking about what is a pattern over the last 30 years that has allowed Dubai to progressively, in fact, not even sustainably, but just like almost every few years, it has this hockey stick, something, you know, there's like this huge spike and then it just goes and things get built underneath, right? There are also like other challenges that we need to kind of deal with, but that's not something that's like I need to worry about because there are people who are more knowledgeable about that stuff, right? Like
more competent in.
But exactly, and I don't need to like, you know, question that because it's not my business to understand. But when we talk about this, like cost of living is so important because if it's hard for me, you know, there's this amazing guy in India I remember who was trying to come up with like a sanitary pad for women because he saw his wife struggling so much, and he innovated this really amazing idea. I really tried for a while to like find a way to get in touch, and I want to invest a little bit of money, like $1,000, whatever, right? So you see a lot of problems with like the cosmetics and the beauty industry, especially that caters to women, is that most of the people making decisions are men. And most women don't realize this because there's always women on the ads and stuff, but it's actually men making decisions. So the products are not really made for women because it's basically being architected by men, right? Which is, again, it goes back to like understanding the nature of the problem, but they're very good at marketing and selling. So they sell the product, but you know, they get adoption, but the product's not really a good fit.
Yeah.
And there's this guy who's actually understood the problem because it's a very domestic level and he's trying to fix it. And he's not able to break through because the industry is so like tough, right? The reason I bring this up is because I don't know what happened to the company, but it didn't become super famous. I mean, you haven't heard of it, I guess, right?
No.
I want to look it up and maybe talk about it separately in a second. And I thought this guy was amazing. He's such an innovator, but like, imagine if he was a working guy.
Okay.
And he eventually, he was just a regular Joe working a regular job, making ends meet. It was not wealthy at all. He was actually like lower middle class. Okay.
Okay.
Now, imagine if this guy, someone took a punt early on and said, here's $10,000. Let's set up a manufacturing plant. Here, I've got a buddy who's got a production facility in China. Let's try and mass market this.
Imagine the catalyst.
Just imagine, right? And now imagine if that person landed in Dubai or landed anywhere in the region, okay? How would they build this if they came from that segment of society with that kind of income group? How would they be able to innovate that? Such a fundamental thing. You think that at this point we would have figured it out. We haven't actually. Apparently the tools are just not good enough for the purpose. And if this person was able to do it here, right? How wonderful would it be if they could do that? But they can't do it because for whatever reason, let's just say it's never not choice, but that's just an example, right? How many millions of people are there who cannot even realize the dream of an idea because it's just not easy to do? I couldn't do it, and I was comfortable. Like I'm not comfortable anymore. I'm like hurting, but I was more comfortable before because, I had more runway and everything as, in my personal life, right? My son's getting older. Got to put him to school. Can't compromise on that. Can't compromise on lifestyle and home.
Yes.
We've cut down on all sorts of things like, our comforts and lifestyles. My wife gets, it's like, maybe you should think about getting a job. And I'm like, I'm just so purpose driven, right?
Yeah.
And, sometimes I like give it a moment.
But you're not alone,
Yeah, you got to, think about the practicalities, right? And we're not affluent and we don't live a high life either, right? And we're not talking, I have a Chinese car, I just said, right?
Yeah.
I'm like gone backwards, right? Budget. It's a great car. But so cost of living, number one. Okay. And number two is then everything else that basically goes from, okay, now we give you the opportunity to be able to take things, tools, basic tools. Okay. You don't need to be taught how to use them. Yes, we can guide you on the best use cases. Okay. How do you best use money? And there are ways.
Who they?
Anybody. It could be banks. It could be advisors, mentors, whatever, right? When an environment is enabled by the idea of if you're not successful, you're not anything, right? So now you have to be able to kind of think about, okay, how much time
so there's an element of competitiveness that is instilled in people. Is this what you're trying to say?
But it's not necessarily the right kind of competition.
That's what I'm trying to say.
It's dangerous because it's toxic, right? Because
you can't have competition at this level still. I mean, competition is when let's say you're just walked into a gym.
It's a barrier to entry though.
That's what I'm trying to say. So imagine you just walked into a gym.
Yeah.
You can't compete.
No.
Like it doesn't make any sense.
You're just getting started.
You have to be
learn the
cheered
environment.
on. You have to be taken care of. You have to
guidance.
be adopted.
Yeah.
You need to be guided.
But you also need to know what's the first right
is
step.
competition, because the moment you introduce competition at someone who just walked into the gym, then obviously you lost.
I don't know. I mean, to be fair though, I think...
I don't know. I'm just trying to explain what I understood from your point.
So I think competition is absolutely necessary. I think from the very beginning.
Okay.
But I don't think it's like competition where like I'm going to kill the person who's trying to do something. That's I think what you might have understood. I think it's like I will also look at something as competition even when it doesn't look at me at all. Like I come into the gym and I see all these muscular people and lean people and people who just know how to use the equipment and machine. And I'm just coming there, I'm like scrawny or overweight or whatever. And I'm feeling like really embarrassed and shy. But I've had the courage to actually come into the gym.
But that's intrinsic. What I'm trying to say, imagine if the environment...
The gym doesn't care who you are when you walk in.
And that's what I'm trying to say. I think if the gym cares and collaboratively adopts you...
The gym doesn't care. See, the gym's job is not to care. The gym's job is to exist and to give you the same opportunities that it gives everybody else at the gym. That's what it is.
Okay.
The region has to be like that gym. It gives the opportunities to everyone, but the cost of entry is high. So it's like a luxury gym versus just a gym. What's the difference between a luxury gym and a regular gym? You can get the same kind of physique and body in a regular gym as you can in a luxury gym. The difference is the water bottles that they have, the carpeting, the lighting, the music, the equipment, brand, maybe the trainers are better looking, whatever, right? But that's not the aspiration. The aspiration is the end result, which is to have a better, healthy lifestyle, right?
True.
It doesn't mean that I want to but the thing is that we also want to be in a gym where we're looking at, more inspirational or aspirational elements, like, better looking people, better people who are fit, people who look like they know what they're doing, because it actually makes me more, it helps me realize my best self, right? So that challenge, so it's the difference between being challenged. It allows me to visualize
myself in the future.
Exactly. It's like the difference between what is something that suppresses you versus something that challenges you.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Challenge and suppression are two different things.
True.
And these are things that we're like, this is where we are right now, okay? Is that how do you challenge something without suppressing it? So you need headwind because you need to have resistance because there has to be a barrier to entry. Can I make that very interesting point I talked about at the very beginning, which I didn't touch on, which is the similarity between the F&B industry and entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Okay? The second thing is that acceptance. Now, the acceptance is not there for everybody. The opportunities need to exist, right? So this is not getting into every accelerator. This is not getting funded by everyone. That's not what I'm talking about, right? It has to be restrictive. It is required. But everyone should have the same opportunities that allow
to try.
Yeah. So some kind of, maybe a part
basic
of it is...
Basic sustenance, let's say?
Part of it is meritocracy.
Okay.
It's the ability for all people to be viewed in the same way.
At a certain stage.
Yeah, at a certain stage. That's it. It's the stage. People who come here aren't coming at the same stage. Yesterday I learned about this guy who became a really famous brand ambassador for a bunch of brands. Some guy, yesterday somebody talked about it, as a person who's a labor worker in a labor camp.
Oh.
Basically started making TikTok videos of like a day in the life of so-and-so. And he became so famous that he's endorsing brands.
Oh, wow.
This is like, that's
a good thing.
That's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Now this is actually starting to happen. So the point I'm trying to ultimately...
You mean you wanted the same in entrepreneurship?
I want the same thing in entrepreneurship. This guy didn't do this because he wanted to become an entrepreneur. He became one... Accidentally or just by like happenstance, because he wasn't solving a problem. He wasn't fixing someone's light bulb better, faster with some tech. He was just sharing his life, his journey, and it connected with so many people. So it resonated with like his audience, and his audience swelled, and it became huge. And this is, and it goes back to telecom. It's like telecom creates the infrastructure that allows people to have this, to create their own unfair advantage. No matter how you get access to it, whether it's a prepaid or a postpaid connection, you get access to the internet.
Yes.
When you have access to the internet, then you have abilities. Now you can use those abilities to be great or not great. This is where the foundation is really important, that the cost of living comes in. That we are able to live as poor people or as very wealthy people, but our entry into this opportunity is starting from the level that we're comfortable or we're at. If I have to elevate my level in order to become able to enter, it's like I've got like a limited access pass to a certain club that is exclusive to certain people. You see where I'm going?
Yeah.
So if the bar is too high, then you eliminate a huge segment of people who have dreams and visions and ambition.
And the potential cost is just crazy.
It's just impossible, right? I mean, if you think about it, like for somebody to come here and to live in the region, it's pretty expensive. It's hard to come here.
Why would you want to have it otherwise?
I'm not saying that it should be cheaper.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm saying that the pursuit of entrepreneurship, it's hard to explain, but I guess in some
But I agree with you. I mean, there's the license fees, there's the new taxing system, which is not substantial by any stretch of, any measure.
No.
But I understand what you're
VAT,
saying.
for example, $100,000 a year, then you have to file taxes, right?
Exactly.
Fine, fair enough.
Which has some consideration for those sort of underdogs that are trying to build things and they haven't yet made it.
Exactly.
Which is great, which is progressive and I like it. I mean, in the sense of, you know what, if you haven't made it, it's fine. We're not going to kind of bully you into paying us. But
exactly.
I think
license fees, co-working spaces.
Yeah.
These are fundamentals. The cost of using these resources is quite expensive.
Are you impacted by it?
Of course, everybody is. Everybody's impacted by it. I mean, you pay rent as a business to work in a certain place, right? It's also understanding that there's a cost to doing certain things. Like if I take a co-working desk right now, I'll spend like 15,000 dirhams a year. 2 people can come and, use it, but they have to alternate. They can't both be there at the same time. Many places are like this.
Yeah.
They don't really care. They let you both come. It's fine. But technically they could bring the rule of law and say only one of you allowed here. So one of you has work from somewhere else, right? So you can't really innovate with a partner or co-founder unless, that's allowed. Then you have to pay a little bit more to pay for more space or time, right? 15,000 dirhams a year for somebody who's just starting out, paying another 5, 8, 10,000 dirhams on top of that. That's like 25,000 dirhams a year.
That's prohibitive.
That's very prohibitive. It's like $5,000 a year for someone who's, just think about it. It's the ability to actually, then I have to make that money. $5,000. And I'm talking about I built a company that generated millions in revenue in dollars. But we always used to get pinched by this because there's this impending doom of this cost that we'd have to be prepared for. And cash flow is not easy. In a business, your cash flow is irregular. Clients play, they don't play, they pay, they delay. Yes. And then the month comes where you have to renew. And if you don't renew, then you're in trouble.
Something is like it's
bank will block your payments,
Yeah.
Then suddenly the thing that you're trying to fix is stopped by the thing you're trying to fix.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
See, you were saying, so these are things so it's like understanding, okay, how do we make that easier? How do we make that not prohibitive, but actually make it more conducive, right? So I'm not saying that things shouldn't be expensive. I think there's a cost of living. There's a cost of doing business.
Exactly. And free market will always decide at a certain point in time. And
absolutely.
If it's going in a certain direction, then probably it's not someone's doing, it's just how things are. But the question is, what's the alternative?
I don't think it's a question of alternative. I think it's about it's about seeing that and understanding it. So the other part of it is actually, so the ecosystems are coming so people can share knowledge with each other. But, if you think about it, like my wife used to say this a lot, before entrepreneurs, there were business people, right? I mean, for centuries, people have done business. How do they do business? And what is that?
The majority were I was just speaking to a friend of mine. The majority of our ancestors were actually business people.
They were just business people.
The concept of employment was just very small segment of people, like 80% were actually business owners.
SMEs, small businesses.
Exactly.
80%. Even today, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Even in restaurants, 85% of restaurants are small, medium. They're mom and pops, right? Equivalent. And that's the vast majority. So it's not about making it fair for everyone so everyone can have access to the same resources. But at the same time, for somebody who's trying to get in, they have to take risks. And that's the other thing. So point number 1 is cost of living. Point number 2 is how to be able to make risk more acceptable.
Approachable.
Risk is
it's not fatal. It's not the option is not about fatal risks.
Yes,
okay.
That's it, right? If I feel like the risk I will take it will annihilate me if I fail. It will annihilate me. It's not that I can start again. Like I can go and live with my uncle and aunt. I can do you don't have, those are the things that don't exist, right? And that doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. Because now when you look at other markets, you see, okay, cost of living, risk appetite. Risk appetite is not something I have. It's something that I understand as a consequence of what's allowed
what are the
in the environment that I'm in.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what are deciding those factors and how do I play a part in actually making them more amenable to myself? See what I mean? These are nothing to do with ideation, creativity, access to capital. Those are all tools. These are other things. These are those things that we don't measure because we don't see them.
Those two elements are there.
These are the foundations, right? If I have a fear of taking a risk, how can I innovate? Because I'm afraid that the cost of that innovation will come at my personal sacrifice. That's too great for me to bear. Then how will I do something valuable with it? How can I do something? It's this thing. I mean, me and a couple of people argue about who said it first, but I guess let's just say that the person who said it first, which is when you're in an airplane, right? Anyone who watches this and knows what I'm talking about is going to cringe at this moment. When you're in an airplane, okay, and before you take off, they do the safety demonstration.
Yes.
Okay, and the crew when they come to the oxygen mask, what they say is first cover your face and mouth and then help the person next to you.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who they are, whether you're a child, you're a grandparent.
And actually the video is a child and a parent. Yeah.
Exactly, right? But it's always you do it first and then you help the other person next to you, right?
True.
What does that mean? It means if you can't help yourself, you can't help other people.
There's no point.
It means if your own sustainability and your life is at so much jeopardy, how can you help other people when your own foundation is brittle, when it's so like on weak foundation, right?
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be because I have less resources and so I cannot do this. If I have less resources, that's fine. But the risk of me, a millionaire, has the same risk appetite as a very poor person because their risk is relative to their circumstances, right? But a person with $1 million will view risk in a different way because the tools available to them at that level will be different versus the person at the other level.
Yes.
So if the ability to understand risk and to be able to make risk more, let's say, unbiased, if you will, to make it. And I don't know so this is not something that most economies are built by the people of the economy, right? A small example I give is like, have you noticed how many roads that walkways there are in Dubai, right? Not many.
Yeah.
There are a lot of places for cars. And it's interesting because you had basically horses and camels. Okay. That was the mode of transport. And then cars came, roads were built, big highways, because there was long distances and small villages in between. Right. And then they got connected with more and more infrastructure and more stuff for the pedestrian stuff came later. When you go to Europe and the US, you see a lot more pedestrian stuff because people walked first, right? Because there were places to go and things got built so the circumstances are different here. When you really kind of unpack that and you see what was the thing that happened here, right? And how did it actually transpire into what it became?
To understand the why behind it.
Like when you look at the distance between one side of Sheikh Zayed and the other side of Sheikh Zayed, it's only like 50 meters, but actually I got to go like 1 kilometer this way, 2 kilometers this way. So it's going to take me 45 minutes plus the traffic. You know what? Delivery.
Yeah.
Right? I can't go there because it's just going to be too much work, right? That doesn't mean Dubai builds more like walkways and bridges, right? That's not the solution. And the solution is also not to create more of those things. But Dubai has done some amazing stuff to try and create those ecosystems. And I remember when I moved here about 13, 14 years ago, you kind of had to go a distance to do something. Yeah. Now you don't really have to do that because in your own community, you'll find.
They build this localized communities.
Exactly, right? And that's the stuff that other places had done a long time ago that are happening here now, which are allowing those things to happen.
Yeah.
It's a natural progression. So I'm saying that those are the two ingredients, but I'm not saying that we don't have them. I think that we're on the path to having them. I think that it's a natural evolution.
As long as we're able to recognize them and see them for what they are, then naturally, progressively, we'll be able to figure out how we can come around them without sort of breaking the bigger picture, which is the system, how Dubai is built, the kind of 80-90% of expats and people can just take leverage and advantage of this and just leave. Unlike, let's say, in Europe or otherwise, where probably 90% of the people are naturalized, they're part of the system, they're not just expats coming there for a few years and leaving.
Exactly, right? Transient nature. So now, what has Dubai done to actually start making, or the region actually, again, let's be broad about this, because it is fine. It might be something that they do here in Dubai first, but it does spread. Yes. Right now, it's become a bit competitive in the region as well. Lots of accelerators, lots of ecosystems, whatever, but the first thing they did was the introduction of the freelancer license.
Yeah.
That was game changing, right? A lot of people came up with these nomad licenses. They didn't call it that here because that's not what they wanted, right? They didn't want to see people setting up a company and then living somewhere else because that looks shady, right? But that's not what they wanted. They wanted it to be authentic. They wanted people to actually come and build a business to contribute to the economy as well, right? People leveraged it in whatever way they wanted to, but ultimately it came down to like, okay, that's the first step. It's like enable people to have. So it did that. Started introducing ways. So this is not addressing cost of living, by the way. This is reducing barriers of entry. We're making more affordable for people to set up a company.
Yeah.
Okay. So if it's more affordable to set up a company, that's a great point. There are places where you can get a license for 1,000 dirhams a year, for 5,000 dirhams a year, and there's limited time, right? You have to grow out of that eventually.
Yes.
This is the expectation that you will eventually. I can set up a company.
And that's a good meritocracy system, right? I mean, if you have merit
for the first 3 years or 5 years, and then after that, it's not. And that's the problem, right? So like Delaware, I can set up a company in Delaware right now for like a few $100s. That's all I'll ever pay for the license. That's a one-time cost. The cost of the cheapest license here is the cost of a standard license in Delaware. Now it's a US, taxes, you have to think about that, offshore company, whatever. There are other considerations, right? So they find other ways. And it's harder as a process, but there are service providers who will help you through that process. So it is a choice. So there is a competition between those two entities, right? I think that cost of living is addressed by two things. Number one is the ability for people to be able to actually not have that high risk fear of what will happen if I don't do this well, and the risk at which I or my family will experience peril. Okay. The second thing is the ability for me to actually have that low cost of entry and for it to be just that low cost. So that the cost of the basic thing shouldn't prohibit me from being able to do the thing on top of it, which is innovate.
Yes.
To build something, right? To
the
create a company.
The actual meaning of what I'm doing. Yeah.
Free market economy, as you said. I can work from home. I can work from a coffee shop. I can rent a really big, expensive office and just work from there. That's the choice.
Yeah.
I have the choice, right? If I get a license, I shouldn't be required to have a co-working space.
Why is that in your opinion? Is there a reason that is communicated or clear?
Is that a reason why it's required, or is there a reason why I think it should be separated?
No. Of course, it's separated. So my rationale is, why do you have these two together, tied together?
So then again, it's about going back and understanding the why, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's because of the nature of real estate. Because when you're tied to a lease, then it's tied to an individual. It's like that ultimate beneficial owner, UBO. Right?
Yeah.
There's a person who can be held responsible because something happens. It's the risk appetite of the entity. And this is where the risk is opposite. The risk I have is commensurate or in an opposite diametrically opposed way of the entity that the risk is actually either emanating from, or it will create a higher risk because of the danger of what will happen if I screw this up. See? So the bank doesn't have a risk appetite. The bank doesn't see a hot desk. So that's and funny enough, that's the cheapest kind of office space I can have is a hot desk. Right?
Yeah.
It's like a desk where I can go, I don't have to go, but it's not a physical space. I don't have to have a phone number. These are old world ways of thinking about stuff. It's like, how do I tie someone down to something?
Yeah.
Indonesia, Bali doesn't care about that. The US doesn't care about that. UK doesn't care about that. Most of Europe, where there are places where they don't care about that. But then why aren't we going and building and living there? Because there are other challenges. There are other problems, societal problems, cultural problems, whatever, right? So we want to be in Dubai. We want Dubai to have the best of everything. And this is the thing I love about Dubai. Because Dubai will actually,
recognize
they will recognize this. They will listen to my voice.
They will design.
Somebody will hear this.
Absolutely.
And they will affect change.
Yes.
I have seen in these
that's the intention.
There's no city in the world, I think, that experiences change at such a rapid pace and actually brings infrastructural change.
And in the right way, for the right reasons. Exactly. Right?
I
mean, the biggest testament is, or evidence is Golden Visa.
Yeah.
You know, immediately, me too. So the thing is, it just happened. They saw a problem. They started experiencing it. They designed. I'm sure people sat behind closed doors. They did all sorts of
workshops
and analysis studies and all that sort of stuff. And there's like, you know what? This is how it is. What are the pros? What are the cons? And boom, it happened.
That's it. And this is why I choose. This is why my son is born here. This is why I own a home here. This is why I choose to build my companies here. Is because it will eventually. Now, I can afford Dubai that time. As an individual, I'm contributing to the economy. So I'm affording Dubai that time.
Yes.
Dubai is not allowing me. I'm allowing Dubai. This is very important because as an individual, I'm contributing to the economy. But Dubai is allowing me to be able to have those opportunities because it's giving me the infrastructure at the level that I can come in. Right? I want that to be available to wider people, which means that certain things that I know hurt me at my comfort level, I know are traumatizing people.
It's not fatal for you, but it's definitely fatal for others.
Definitely fatal for other people. And there's a point at which it will be fatal for me if I don't succeed, right? And then what happens then? And then what if I can't find a job? If I have to give up on my dream, I have to go and find a job. What if I can't find a job? What happens then?
And
You
those
know?
are questions has to be taken into consideration.
All these questions have to be taken into consideration. So there needs to be ways around this, or ways to be able to plan and think about this, right? The ultimate, the other option shouldn't have to be, I got to pack up and leave. That shouldn't be the option, because then you're taking that away.
I love that. So if you start your design workshops in how to solve this problem by having the question or let's say the premise. Yeah. The premise is, anything that we have to tackle should never end up with the risk of I should pack up and leave.
Yeah.
If you start with that premise and then whatever takes you afterwards, I love that.
That's it.
Where do you see Jalebi in 10 years?
Oh man, where do I want to see Jalebi in 10 years? I think is probably the question I'd like to answer. We've done a great job in building our brand, but I don't really care about people knowing the brand. I think we've done a great job with that, but it's like somebody said to me recently, it's very frothy, right? The shine of the brand, right? Like I want everybody who we want to serve using our product without anyone knowing who we are. That for me is the ultimate dream. I want to be the power behind the curtains that nobody knows.
Okay.
And not for nefarious intent. I want it to be something that truly serves the need without being,
because if they don't think about it, that means it's working
second nature, right? It's like these days you can't live without your phone. It doesn't matter who invented the phone anymore.
True.
Who invented the phone?
But if it doesn't work, then you know about it, and then it's horrible.
It's like the absence of the internet, right? What if the internet went off today?
Yeah.
What would we do?
But you don't think about it.
You don't think about it.
You don't
right?
wake up in the morning to use the internet.
You don't use it because you think it might be the last time you'll use it either.
Exactly.
You use it because it's like water.
I love when I was researching obviously your product and your company and your venture. I love how your CRM is yours.
Yeah.
Right. Your POS is yours.
Yeah.
What else? Your inventory management system is yours. So everything is, you're not licensing different bits and pieces and stitching it together.
We're not using white label. We're not like taking off the shelf. We built every line of code for everything in-house.
Last thought, and this is one of the things that I always kind of ask my guests, especially at your level, who are builders, who are understanding things from a certain vantage point, right?
Yeah.
Are we in this region predominantly? I mean, you're obviously a shining example of the opposite of what I'm going to say, right? But are we in this region buying innovation?
Should I be worried?
Probably you should, not because of you, because of everyone else. But are we buying innovation or are we investing in innovation?
Oh man, that's such a delicate question. Look, I think we're doing a bit of both. Okay. At some point there was so much criticism of this region.
No, it's a criticism as a pragmatic way of looking at things.
Not my answer to you, but there was this criticism. There was importing ideas and culture and innovation from other places, right? Like art and whatever. It didn't have its own, which I fundamentally disagree with, right? I disagree with it because, and now I'm going to be very controversial, and I don't care about being controversial about this. The people who are criticizing this region for importing innovation from other places are the ones who actually culturally misappropriated that innovation to begin with.
Okay.
Now, you think about colonialism.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to take it on a complete tangent.
Okay.
Colonialism is the idea that I'm going to go somewhere, colonize something, and then take the best parts of that and make it mine.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what Europe has done fundamentally. Yeah. As a rule, today, when you look like, something that we think about.
They didn't shy away from it. I mean,
they didn't shy away from it.
If you look at the 1800s or 1900s, newspapers actually they used to say it.
You can go back 700 years and I can give you historical dates and facts that will actually tell you, and they will form a pattern. Yeah. And I will geek out on this because I'm angry about this, but I also don't want to get angry emotionally without understanding it. And again, this is my nature. I really want to unpack it and really go to the bottom, like, why does this happen?
Critically think about it.
Really critically think about it.
Yeah.
And cultural misappropriation is taking the Kohinoor diamond from India, putting it on the crown jewels of the Queen of England, and then just, being nice and saying, here's cricket and tea, but like not actually giving the thing that's going to give us back our wealth as the region, right? That is what makes me upset. And that's what I think is really kind of the problem of people who are trying to criticize something without really understanding it, right? Is that this region is famous for, let's say in Dubai specifically, pearl diving, right? As like one form of trade that was indigenous to the region. Yeah. And then Bedouin life, right? Living in the desert and nomadic, right? Moving around, right? It has its own culture. What is Bedouin life? A tent, fire, and people from strangers from yonder seeing a light, coming there, being welcomed as family, being fed as if it's an expectation. That was sense of entitlement then. That is culture for me. That is culture. There's an expectation of a thing to be away. For me, that is the definition of culture. It's a thing to be away.
Okay.
It's an expectation that every Starbucks or any business that I go to that's a franchise will be consistent. It will be the same thing no matter where I go, right?
Yeah.
It's that formula of like creating a pattern of something and then having that expectation attached to that pattern so that it's repeatable, so that consistency will lead to expectations that are comfortable.
Yeah.
And they make, I can get complacent as well. So
the expectation is hospitality from those Bedouin people.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. That's exactly. And but then things don't move at the same pace. And so when we talk about like, the original question was essentially like importing innovation versus local innovation, right? I guess in a way, right? And I think
as in focus, not as in what we're doing now.
Okay.
Right? Because obviously when you start, you have to buy things.
Yeah.
And then slowly, it's like what China did in the early 1990s, where they sort of copied everything. And that's why the stigma against China. But then they kept on doing it until now they're actually innovating and they're pioneers into putting the future forward.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm talking about the intentions.
Yeah.
Sort of speak, professionally speaking,
exactly.
not criticize, not from a criticism perspective,
completely
but from a trajectory perspective.
And my criticism of everyone else who is criticizing it.
That, to people, it's easy to criticize, it's harder to build, right?
It is, exactly. And I think that's the thing that, it took 30, 35 years for people to really appreciate the vision of this city and how that's emanated across the region. It's become the shining beacon of the region.
Yeah.
It has taken away from Singapore what Singapore was, and it created its own like iconic like period in time and airline and everything. I could see Dubai doing this for the next 50 years easily.
Yeah.
And pole position.
Yeah. The momentum is really high.
Exactly. Because like you said, the golden visa, the freelance, it's all these things are happening and they're happening at rapid pace. And it's rapid pace, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a fundamental inversion in the desire of what this needs to be versus what others want theirs to be.
Yeah.
Right? The attraction for people to go to other places historically was always getting away from the strife of where they were. Moving away from South Asia to go to North America because it's a land of opportunity. Going to London because it's, the migration was happening. But, I was talking about this with somebody who recently I discovered is actually a relative. Anyway, it's a whole other story. It's crazy this is happening. And we were talking about how people will leave Pakistan, like a village of Pakistan, and go to a pocket of England and take their traditions and their culture and basically seal themselves into a time capsule. And the people that they left in Pakistan will evolve and become all these like really cool, like modern, and they would have been trapped in the 70s.
That, yeah.
And this happens everywhere in the world, right? That's the opposite of innovation. That's like going somewhere to just be amongst your own kind, as opposed to immersing yourself into the local
because
thing.
You're running away from something.
Exactly. Here, I think that we do a bit of both, and I think that's a necessary evil. Exactly what you said. A diamond is not just formed, right? It's two opposing forces that are creating tremendous friction, and under pressure, a diamond emerges. And a diamond is extremely valuable because it's hard and rare and difficult.
True.
That's what innovation could be. I think that's what it is, and I think that's what Dubai is really making you realize. That's what the region is doing. Riyadh is coming up in a big way. There's all kinds of things that are happening in the whole space of allowing more people or enabling more people to be able to be more adventurous.
Yeah.
Bring it back to your coffee. And I think that's really where we are. So I think we're at the turning point of this region becoming the most important region in the world, because it is making it more accessible to be able to bring your dreams and realize them here more than anywhere else. And this is why it's so attractive to be here. If I was like to talk about all the things that I don't like about Dubai and all the things that I love about Dubai and the region at large, I would be very honest about it. But the prime example of what I actually feel is in my choices of being here and living here. And I don't see people ask me like, where do you think you're going to go after Dubai? I'm like, I don't think about that because it's not, going back to Pakistan is not an option.
Isn't that a golden handcuffs? Or
maybe it is, because it's like, well, but the thing is a standard of living, like we go travel to other places.
The reason why I'm asking this is if you unpack everything about the region, again, I keep, we keep on talking about Dubai, but Dubai is a representation of the region at large. And when I talk about the region, I talk about from Dubai all the way to probably Egypt, probably Jordan, it doesn't matter. This block of land, right? That is cohesive at certain point in time. And until now, obviously, but is there a move, a trajectory? So my point is, when you make a trend analysis and you sort of do regression analysis, and then you kind of project forward, are we going to the direction of proper independent innovation, production, and exportation? And it's not just about technology. It's not just about it's everything in between, right? Are we going there? And that's a genuine question that I'm trying to ask most people, simply because we can, the alternative is falling prey to the illusion of innovation. And obviously, if you fall prey to the illusion of innovation, and obviously you don't know what you don't know, then when time comes where you actually need it, it's not there. Now, obviously, there's no clear cut answer to that. You can't just simplify, and obviously it's naive to kind of try to reduce it, to a simple statement or a simple even podcast in that sense. But the question that I keep on asking is, okay, why is, let's say, the innovation index, and I keep on talking about this, and everybody talks about this, when I talk to everybody about this, is, okay, the innovation index, which is the United Nations sort of way of measuring nations' innovation, and it's normalized to a lot of things. So it's just, it doesn't compare United States and China to the UAE in its raw format. It's obviously normalized. And that's why United States and China are not number one, although they're the biggest exporters from a per capita basis, or let's say quantity basis. But look at Singapore. They're higher than everyone else in this region, from an exportation, from academic publications, from patent applications, from everything in between. Look at Malta. Which is obviously like a dot in the Mediterranean Sea. Look at Estonia. Crime rate is just higher. Everything, safety is lower. And most of these countries are formed, in 1966, in the 60s.
And they've come out of some struggle, by the way.
And they're coming out of massive Korea, actually, they were in turmoil until the very late 80s, in so much turmoil. And, the history is just so bloody there. Yes. So the point is, what is it? And, I kind of subscribe, maybe not, I don't know. I don't want to project my own sort of biases. No, it's fine. That we're young nations, we're this, we're that. Fine. Okay. Yeah, I subscribe to that as well. But Korea kind of came out of really massive turmoil in the late 80s. Japan came of World War II. I mean, Jordan was formed in 1948. Japan was demolished in 1948, right? Nothing like Japan. The point that I'm trying to make, China was nowhere to be found anywhere near innovation as early as 1995. You can imagine that. And I mean, I did a video of, the video where it shows you the in time how people were ranking and their production. China actually was behind Saudi Arabia and UAE in the 1990s. Can you imagine that? And that's according to the innovation index. And then it just kept going up all the way till now they're in the top 10. The point that I'm trying to make is the trajectory. And what do we think about it now? Do we acknowledge, or are we falling into the illusion of innovation? Because if we do, then obviously we're not going anywhere.
China is a great example, because I remember the day that I learned about the fact that people used to go and use cash to buy cars.
Right.
There was a time when cash was the current, that was a thing, right? I mean,
because you didn't have an option.
You didn't have an option. There was no digital. And a friend of mine who's been in China for the last 20, 25 years, he came to Dubai, we hung out, and and he's like, man, you guys are so behind. In China, we don't even have wallets. Just use our phone for everything.
Yeah.
I was like, but what if your phone dies? It doesn't charge it anywhere, and doesn't cost us anything to do that. Infrastructure is all just so connected. Now, one could argue, well, that means they know where you are, and Big Brother and CCTV. And I was like, look, if you don't like it, go live on an island and cut yourself off from the internet. But if you're going to accept that you're going to live in a modern city,
to that point, to
exactly,
think that
you're going to be so worried. I mean, fine, somebody's tracking your data points, and you form some, you're feeding some algorithm. But
I'm tracking my people. I mean, I have pixels, and I have.
Yeah, exactly, right. So, exactly. And so, I mean, we're just doing that. Let's not get into a debate about that, right? But look, I mean, there's a rite of passage. Okay. When you look at patterns of economies that have become certain things, there's a pattern. In telecom, again, we used to see this a lot. When we were in Pakistan building a telecom company, we were looking at India because India, Pakistan, of course, it's fire and ice, right? Like also historically, so like controversial. Most of my closest friends are Indian. Funnily enough, we get along so well. And, we'd always look at India because just that immediate competition of next door, right? You wouldn't look at Afghanistan because Afghanistan had lacked infrastructure, right? And then you look at, okay, what was the big bump before India? Actually, it wasn't the Middle East. It wasn't even East Asia. It was actually North America. Europe kind of meandered in the middle, right? And we have this whole thing about Europe, going back to that earlier point I was making, is that they took so much away from everyone else that they could have, again, it's that thing of barrier to entry. They gave themselves the luxury of sitting on their laurels and not innovating. Today, Europe is not the hotbed of innovation. It is not.
True.
People leave Europe to go other places to innovate, right?
Because
Europe is lazy, right? As a region, it's very difficult to move there because regulation, things take too much time.
Bureaucracy.
And the reason for that, by the way, at a very basic level, is that they've taken so much from other regions through their colonization that they've basically just become very complacent, lazy. It's like, gout. They call it the king's disease. Why do they call it the king's disease? Because you eat meat, which is a rich person's food, and drink beer, which is also something that luxurious and celebratory, right? That's what gives you gout, technically, is like dark meats and all of that stuff, right? It's because there's so much like wealth that you could just be lazy and just chill and be like, what do we need anything for? We can just chill, right? The US was formed on the basis of innovation because it was created, the idea of capitalism formed the day that the Pilgrims landed on the East Coast, right? And that's, again, a whole other thing. I studied American history for a long time, and but that was formed on the basis of innovation. So innovation sparked the thing, but it came at a cost. It came at a cost of taking away from someone else in order to create something, right? The Pilgrims that came took away from the locals, and the locals became completely annihilated, and they were compensated with like these really silly things like, you have this territory and now all the casinos are in the Native American territory, which is, and you've got all these Native Americans who are like wastrels now because they're like, it just created this whole spiral effect. Same in Australia. Aborigines people are wiped out. They were the locals, right? Who went to Australia? It was like, basically it started with like, the not so good people, like criminals, basically sent from England.
Yes.
England is at the epicenter of all of this, right? But again, this is not that talk. What I'm basically trying to say is that there is not that problem here. You're not taking away something from someone else to create something. So that struggle is not here. And because that struggle is not here, it's going to have its own journey. It's going to have a different journey. Innovation in markets like South Asia and Africa happen because there's a struggle of like intense difference between parties. They're waging a war of difference, whether it's religion, whether it's culture, whether it's belief in something else, whatever it is, whether it's money. Here, there isn't that. Here, there is peace. Here, there is some kind of let's get along and find a way to make this happen together, which is basically, in a way, is like, okay, how have others done it and how can we make that our own version of that, right? So it's like the friction is less, and so that need and urgency is lower. So we're later, but we have the advantages of technology. We have the advantages of more global wealth. We have more, globalism. People are traveling more. So we're going to actually be the thing, it's like, being first to market is not always the best thing.
True.
Actually, it's better if you can learn from others who have broken the ground and done the heavy work for you. You can come in and be like the fifth person and just do it better than everyone else. It's not about doing it better than everyone else. It's actually just doing it better, period. So that eventually you attract more talent, you attract more people, right? There's an urgency and a sense of self-perpetuated necessity, which isn't necessarily natural. I think that's probably something that we might feel like is stimulating.
Yes.
But I do agree with you. I feel like, there is this imbalance, and I think that imbalance is going to self-regulate. I'm a big believer in the idea of Adam Smith, who had this concept of, the invisible hand of market regulation, self-correction, that every 3 months, the market will self-regulate. You zoom out to like a 3-month period and you'll see the pattern is in the direction that it is. And so to answer your question, are we headed in the right direction? Absolutely. It's never going to be, when you zoom in, it's going to be jagged, it's going to be up and down, left and right, wayward. But when you zoom out, you're like, the progress is there because you can see the patterns. You're here, your kids are here, I'm here, my kids are here.
Yeah.
Our friends are here, our families are here. The things that we care most about are closest to us.
True.
And pockets of more of those are happening to form, and the world is finding wherever else there is a struggle, they can come here and there's an equilibrium. And I think these are the things that, this is like, what people will worry about, like utopia and things like that. You know what? The world has seen enough bad stuff. If we have a place where you and I can have the same glass of water, have the same opportunities and same choices. Again, it's differences because of the 2 points I mentioned about cost of living and specifically to entrepreneurship, but just as people, right? Those are things that we're working towards. Yes, we still have ways to go. Yes, things have, lots of work to do. But at the end of it all, we're moving in the right direction. And I want to be here and look back and say, I made an investment in a place. I contributed, but also that I chose to spend my time here than anywhere else because this is the place that gave me the things that I could not find anywhere else. And those made me happy. They made me peaceful. They made me successful. They made me who I am. And I am not just who I am, but I am where I am.
Absolutely. And the reason for these talks is to actually affirm to everything you mentioned, which is we're going in the right direction and contribute to it.
Yeah.
Zohare, thank you very much. I think I'm going to make this into 3 parts.
You might need to make it 5.
Thank you so much for the time. I could go on for hours, but my devices started to fail.